Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are here on the course on the bioethical issues at the beginning of human life within the Master of Science in Bioethics at St. Thomas University, beginning always with a little prayer in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in us the fire of your divine love. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Very especially today on the feast of St. Paul's conversion. I think there's one thing that is consistent about Saul Paul, right, which is the zeal, the same zeal that he had for persecuting this new sect following a radical who was named Jesus Christ, Yeshua. That same zeal that he had for persecuting them after his conversion, the experience of the risen Christ, was poured into evangelizing to the point that he ended up in Rome, giving his life for the faith in the 60s, most likely under Nero. Okay, and so at least he had one consistency in his life, right? And it's interesting to note the New Testament, which has 27 books, 27 books. The four Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, and then all the different epistles or letters. And then finally the book of Revelation. About half of those 27 books were written by Paul, or disciples of Paul, right? The school of Paul. So he had quite a zeal for it. So also interesting to note that he never knew, as far as we know, he never knew Jesus in the flesh. He never knew the historical Jesus. But he had an experience of the risen Christ, which is infinitely more important and overwhelming, I guess, to have the glorified body of the Lord appear to him, right? And challenge him, why are you persecuting me? So, I think I would have died at that point. I would have just melted away. That would have been my disintegration. That would have been my personal second coming. All right. So we thank the Apostle Paul. I don't know if any of you have Jewish ascendancy. I don't have any Jewish ascendancy that we know of our family. Right? Right. Yeah. Maybe the Sephardites who went to Spain centuries ago. Okay. But my brother has been doing the ascendancy on both the paternal and the maternal line. And so far we haven't found any Hasidics or any Jews.
How many conversions do we have?
Yes, exactly. Many conversions and intermingling also. But my point is that most likely we're all from the Gentile world, right? And so we owe it to Paul, through the Holy Spirit, through Paul, that he took the message beyond Jerusalem, beyond Palestine, beyond the Jewish people. I mean, even Jesus said, I have come for the salvation of the Jews, right? The lost hut of the house of Israel. So it was really an insight to go beyond that. Okay, so questions, comments, or anything so far? We're going to get deeper and deeper into it. I think it's also providential that the March for Life just happened once again after 47 years in DC, because today we'll be addressing abortion. In the second half, we still need to finish up some on the ontological status of the human embryo. But before that, I am curious, for example, if you're watching the videos, is the sound okay? Sound is good, all right, so that's this little, this is called a snowball, and it picks up, I think mostly me, but it's supposed to pick you up also, if there are comments.
Yeah, you can hear that.
Yes, it comes through? Yeah. Great, thank you, all right. So that's working. I say technology is great when it works. When it doesn't work, it's very frustrating, right, because we become so dependent. Okay, and the video, I guess, is coming through okay also, as long as I remember to record, then we're good. All right, moving forward then. Let's dim the lights. Also, if you have any questions or comments from your homework, for the summaries, again, I'm always looking for you paraphrasing what I'm saying so that I see that you're understanding and you have your own insights, right? And the handout is like a skeleton, if you will. You can fill out the handout with your own words there. So this is today's handout. I gave you one on fertilization already, gametogenesis and fertilization, and yeah, because some of you used it for the actual summary. So that was last week. Okay, now I'll give you one for the ontological status of the human embryo, and then we'll look at the first of the hot topics at the beginning of human life. So the first half of today's lecture is going to be a little more philosophical and theological. And then the second half, so in this first half, we'll look at what is known as the ontological status of the human embryo. Okay, that's a very loaded phrase, the ontological status of the human embryo, and we'll dissect it, we'll take it apart step by step. The second half of the lecture, hopefully we'll get into the first controversial topic to this day, after almost 50 years of legalized abortion in the United States and throughout the world, you know, the actual bioethics of abortion, okay? And there, we'll do again the two steps, first the biological and then the ethical. All right, so for these first two lectures on the course, I have emphasized the biological aspect of sexual reproduction, the advantages, the evolutionary advantages of sexual reproduction, which is essentially introduces variation in two steps. The first step is the recombination or the crossing over of tetrads during meiosis 1, all right? And then the other one is actually the 50-50 combination of genetic material from father and mother of whatever species. So that also introduces variation so that we're not clones of our parents, we're not identical, but there's some variation, but still remaining within the same species. So we have variation, but variation within the species, okay? So that the dictum of reproduction can take place, that species generate offspring of their own. And you see then the elegance of the structure and function of DNA, and that's why it's called the universal molecule of inheritance. Because in this one macromolecule that is made up of billions of atoms, okay, in this macromolecule is able to hold the genetic information in the genes and the thousands of genes that are there of whatever species to be passed on to the next generation. This one little microscopic package. Right? So we call that elegance, and the elegance of nature. All right. On that aspect, we humans are no different from the rest of animals and even plants that reproduce sexually, because we have an organic component to ourselves, right? And we metabolize the same that other organisms are metabolizing. In fact, there's a lot of, well, we talked about percentage homology. We can look at percentage homology on the DNA, on the genome of different species, but that also translates to what is known as the proteome. The proteome is the equivalent of the genome, but for proteins. In other words, decoding, deciphering the amino acid sequence of proteins, right? Which is equivalent or analogous to decoding the DNA, the genome of every species. And we find that proteins are also highly conserved, whether they are structural proteins, for example, keratin that helps to make up our skin and many parts of our body, hair, etc. Right? That's a protein called keratin, structurally helping for those structures, or functionally, like insulin, for example, or hemoglobin, highly conserved, meaning that the hemoglobin of a human does pretty much the same function as the hemoglobin of a chimpanzee, giraffe, turtle, fish. It's amazing that there is a lot of, they're highly conserved. The sequence is very similar, right? So it also points at this evolutionary process of common ancestors and so forth. So bottom line, organically, we share metabolism with the rest of the animal and plant kingdom and anything else that is living. And so we have an organic component to us. But we also have more. We have a plus. This is the added value, if you will, of the human, which is unique as far as we're concerned. But it does involve belief. So we have to navigate now between intellect and will, in other words, of the known facts that we can figure out by reasoning, but also belief. And what do we believe? That the human body is ensouled, all right? And that makes us truly and fully human. So a little bit of what we would call a Christian, Judeo-Christian theological anthropology is that the answer to who is man, what is the human, who are we, who am I am God's image. Now, that God's image, imago Dei, is a very loaded phrase, God's image. How am I God's image? Because not organically, God, we intuit that God is not organic. God does not metabolize, otherwise we would see him. We would see the organs of God, right? But God is simple, indivisible, eternal, and by being simple, we cannot see him, detect him with the external senses, unless it is through a mystical experience, all right? And therefore is in the realm of the metaphysics. We have physics and we have metaphysics. Physics is anything that is material, and when I say material, I also mean energetic, because matter and energy are interchangeable by Einstein's formula, E equal mc squared. E stands for energy, m stands for mass or material, and so there's an equivalency. But both mass and energy can be measured. I certainly can measure anything that I can sense with my senses, and I can also measure electricity and ultraviolet radiation and heat and so forth. Actually measure it, right? And so it's empirical, it's measurable, and therefore it falls into the realm of the physical. The physical reality, which is empirical, can be measured, and that is the realm of what we call science today. We mean empirical sciences, whether they are the physical sciences or the natural sciences, etc. But there's something beyond the physical, we believe, that we call metaphysical, beyond the physical, all right? And that is the realm of another science, which is philosophy and or theology, right? Philosophy and or theology. Which, by the way, they're also sciences because they have a method. It's not just a personal opinion. It's not just grabbing at straws from who knows where. No, both philosophy and theology have a method, right? In fact, the actual scientific method of empirical science is based at least on philosophy, if not theology. For example, empirical science, natural sciences, physical sciences, they're based on mathematics also, right? Measuring, quantifying. And mathematics is logic by the numbers or by the letters. When I say 2 + 2 is 4, it's a convention. And the convention is that it's 2 objects plus 2 more objects. So we come up with 4 objects. But that is a logical statement, which then translates into numbers or letters. So the background of the empirical sciences is logic, which is philosophy. Another branch of logic is also ethics, and another one is metaphysics, delving into the beyond, the unmeasurable, at least unmeasurable by instruments. Measurable perhaps by the conscience, by the human conscience or the human heart, right? By intuition and induction. And so in this realm of metaphysics, there is one field that is called ontogeny. Ontogeny is the study of being. I think I related to you that my big surprise about hearing about being when I entered seminary 200 years ago, and the philosophy professor kept going on about being, and he was a big, huge man. And I thought, well, why are these black beans or lima beans, or what kind of beans are these? Because I just couldn't get it. I was coming from the very empirical world of marine biology, okay? And finally, it started clicking in. And ever since, I've been fascinated by being, actually, B-E-I-N-G, and the relationship between nature and grace, right? nature and grace, including human nature. And one way or another, if you wish, just a little personal witness of philosophically and theologically and biologically looking at all that stuff mingled together, one way or another eventually guided me into the priesthood. Okay, because then I could really get into it systematically and spend 4 years doing theology or studying theology, and apparently didn't learn enough that I was sent for further studies 4 more years after that, and then did the other 4 years also in genetics and so forth. So I really feel so privileged to have been able to spend so much time studying this stuff. Okay. Ontological. Ontological is the status of the being, all right? So when we say human being, we're making a philosophical statement. We're saying that the human is an entity, a thing, all right? A quid, like the Latin says. Another way of saying that is the essence, the substance, which in grammar, we have a grammatical equivalent, is the noun or the substantive, right? That tells us the what is. This is a chair, this is a desk, and not a butterfly. And this is a cup of sorts, it's not, it's not the ocean. And so the noun tells us the whatness of things. As far as we know, we are the only ones, we humans are the only ones that are able to intuit and to capture the whatness of things, the noun, the substantive. Every other animal or plant walks by and hasn't a clue of the essence, even among them, even of themselves. A lizard doesn't know it's a lizard, as far as we can tell, because it only goes by instinct. Okay, and it's locked into that. It doesn't have, because these things occur at the higher function of the brain, which is abstract thought. And that's why when I say triangle, you can all intuit a triangle which has 3 sides and 3 angles necessarily. It could be any kind of triangle. It could be obtuse, it could be rectangular, it could be equilateral, etc. But the concept of triangle gets through and doesn't get through even to the chimpanzee, which has 99% homology with us. So that's the extra. What is this extra? At the end of the day, it's about the conscience or the soul.
Self-awareness?
Sorry?
Self-awareness?
Part of it is that, which is that 6th sense. So we can talk about the 5 external senses, the classical senses. What? Hearing, taste, sight, touch, and sound, right? Oh no, I said hearing already. Smell. Okay, so these are the 5 external senses, which are empirical because they can be measured. But then there is that internal sense, which some people call the kinesthetic sense, which puts it all together and integrates it. Because what is coming out of my mouth right now is really just sound waves from my vocal cord. And when it's coming into your ears, it's sound waves hitting the tympani, the tympanum membrane, the tympanic membrane, which is then moving those little bones, and the optic nerve will send an electrochemical signal to the brain, but then the brain has to translate that into something meaningful and not just noise. Okay, that translation, that could be that kinesthetic sense, that sense of integrating what we receive from the senses, from the external senses, into something that makes sense or not. All right, so we're going to go there a little bit into philosophy and theology, because our vision of the human person is a Judeo-Christian vision. In other words, it has a God component to it. And God as God, which is creator. And therefore, there were 3 who generated us. Biologically, the sperm of my father, the egg of my mother, but ontologically, or metaphysically, the soul that God gave me. Because as much as they could try, my parents could not give me a soul. It's not transmissible. The soul is indivisible, is personal, is simple, is unique, is eternal, but it's not transmissible. Unlike, for example, the flame of a candle that is able to light another candle. All right, that is transmissible. Why? Because we're talking about energy. It's a transfer of energy. Okay, so we need to get into this soul and the ensoulment aspect, which is really truly what makes us human. And the classical debate has been between immediate ensoulment or delayed ensoulment. In other words, does the human embryo receive the soul, the human soul, that makes him or her human at the moment of fertilization, specifically at syngamy, when diploidy is restored, or sometime later, you see, whereby we would have, if it is later, which is known as delayed ensoulment, then we would have a period of human embryonic development when that human embryo is truly not fully human. It is biologically, genetically Homo sapiens because it has the 10 to 20,000 genes of the human species, but not fully human in the sense that it doesn't really have a soul yet, right? And so perhaps not a person, a human person, which would allow for the possibility of manipulating for sufficient reason that embryo by way of research, by way of discarding it, etc., or using it for human research, including the embryonic stem cells and so forth. If there's a window there when that human embryo is not fully human or not truly a person, then it allows for some justifiable manipulation. All right, if these embryonic stem cells are going to rid humanity of cancer, let's say hypothetically, or diabetes, then, and number one, and number two, that human embryo is Homo sapiens, but doesn't have a soul yet, then perhaps it would be justifiable. You know, we have a great end, okay, to achieve, to experiment then and to use its stem cells. So you understand how the issue of ensoulment is crucial here. All right, when the body receives the soul, okay? All right, so we have to do a little logic because we have fertilization, then we have an embryonic development that starts with a zygote, and we know that biologically, genetically, the zygote is diploid, and through 9 months, normal, I'm talking about normal development, right? There is birth. The case for delayed ensoulment would state that at some stage after the zygote, God infused the soul on this human. Is that a question or a comment? Maria? No?
She doesn't have her sound turned on. She's at an event. She texted me that.
Okay, actually, I have mine turned off, so I don't know how I heard that chime, because this was off. Let me do that. You're saying, sorry, that she was...
She's at an event with her son, so she's watching, but she doesn't have the sound turned on. But she can't. She'll watch the sound later.
Right, okay. All right, so you see we have this development, which chronologically is 9 months, from a single cell to trillions of cells, undifferentiated. That cell is known as totipotent, right? Because it becomes actually the whole body. Whereas here, excuse me, the vast majority of these cells of the baby being born are fully differentiated into specific organs and tissues of the body. I say the vast majority, which implies that there are few cells in the newborn which are not differentiated. What are those cells? Right? Yeah, the stem cells. The stem cells are undifferentiated. They're precursors to become, but they're not totipotent. They're typically not even pluripotent. They're multipotent. In other words, they're already committed to particular organs and tissues of the body. Okay? Not to worry too much about that. We'll pick it up later, the potency of cells. But basically, we have this 9-month development. I think that anyone who has some level of education and sees a newborn baby would agree, most people would agree that probably that baby already has a soul. At any rate, when there is birth, that baby is protected by law as a legal person anyway. So we don't have to worry about from birth forward, for now, because they're starting at the other end. Okay, but it's the 9 months. It's the 9 months that are crucial. Okay, and the full 9 months, by the way, because I want to say in anticipation of the second half, that 1 minute before that baby is born, that baby has no legal status, essentially. Yes, some legal status that can be overridden just by the wish and the will of the mother, of the pregnant mother, okay? We'll get there. So when? Making an argument for delayed hominization. It's also known as hominization, what makes the embryo human, fully, truly human, right? Immediate versus delayed hominization. When would we posit a human soul on this developing embryo that is not the zygote? And by what standard, other than just, an opinion? By what do we use? Do we want to use the first instance of cellular differentiation, for example? Okay, beyond the zygote and the morula, because these cells are still totipotent, we know that if this cluster of cells, the morula, is disaggregated, each one of those individual cells, which are known as blastomeres, each one of those can become a new individual in the human and the non-human. I don't know if the name Hans Spemann means anything to you from last century, the beginning of last century. Spemann was a German who was an embryologist, and he did pioneer work on this. He took frog morulas and disaggregated them in a petri dish, and from each one of those disaggregated cells came a new frog, tadpole.
He wanted to know at what stage they wouldn't be viable.
Yes, exactly. He was looking for viability, which is another word here, right? I'm thankful for introducing that, because that's one of the key marks, if you will, benchmarks, when the embryo is viable. It's another one. The embryo is human when the embryo is viable. We'll address that one. Okay, so disaggregating the morula will allow for each blastomere to become a new individual, potentially. It has been proven in other animals, and in fact, that is the basis of the monozygotic twins for humans. So maybe first cellular differentiation between the trophoblast and the inner cell mass. But twinning can occur even beyond that, because it's up to 2 weeks in the human species, twinning may occur. So maybe it's at the level of the gastrula, because if this gastrula, which is already beginning to form the 3 germ layers, right? Talked about last time, endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm, even the gastrula may split bilaterally into 2, and each one of those 2 halves of an embryo may develop into a full embryo. It's amazing the plasticity that we have even within the first 2 weeks of a human embryonic development, okay? So maybe there, beyond the possibility of twinning, when we actually have an individual, because how can we have 2 individuals with 1 soul, right? If the soul is not communicable and not divisible, how do the identical twins come up with a soul individually? Unless one is sold and the other one is unsold. We have to address this. We can only address it philosophically and theologically, but I will propose to you some answers to those.
Well, some would say when they're born and they take their first breath. I
Right.
don't agree with that, but that's what some would say.
Yeah. What is so important about the breath? Well, organically, we know that the lungs are functional, right? There's enough surfactant covering the alveoli to take the mix of air, much less density than water or fluid. But also it's a reference perhaps to the ruah of God, the breath of God that breathed into Adam in second Genesis, right? He breathed into Adam the breath of life. So maybe it's a symbolic reference to that breath of life of God. So that leaves us with the quandary, how can this entity not be fully human a minute before birth and be human a minute after birth?
Well, I mean, it also goes to viability, because if they can't, I mean, my aunt had a child who was stillborn.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that child never breathed. It died before it was born, really. But
Right.
the point is, once you're born and you take your breath, you're definitely viable. I mean, you've got to breathe to be viable. So.
Right. The first breath, yes. We place a lot of importance, but is that substantially? In other words, we have essence, we have substance, and then we have accidents. The accidents is the color of our hair, the color of our eyes, the size of our liver, the fact that we're breathing or not, okay? But substantially, the whatness, is this a human being or not? Stillborn babies, they're born. Do we give that stillborn baby a burial or just throw them in the trash? Our intuition would say we give them a burial, right? So when do we place that? What I'm proposing to you is that anytime after the zygote is arbitrary, but it's arbitrary on one particular factor that we are absolutizing, but it's not an absolute factor. And so let me stop here for a moment and get some feedback, some reaction. What do you think? If we don't place ensoulment at the beginning of the new individual, then at what stage would we place that ensoulment? That makes that stage substantially significant, a significant change. Is there, for example, a change in species so that somehow the early embryo is not truly human, it's not Homo sapiens, and all of a sudden becomes human at one particular stage? When? From embryo to fetus? I don't know. What stage is that substantially meaningful, that God would withhold ensoulment until that stage? Please?
If we ask biology, what species that stage
That entity,
belongs
yep.
to, it's going to say it belongs to a human species.
Human species.
So at that level, there's no question that it's not going to turn into anything else. It has the potential, the potentiality of being fully developed as a human.
Right.
So
that's a genetic answer, no? Because it's based on the genetic makeup, the genome.
They wouldn't question that it's a human species.
Right.
So it's not equal whether it's human species versus whether when it's a person, when it becomes a person.
Right.
You know,
Right.
That person.
The person.
You said, you know, the ensoulment and becomes like a rational being. Then definitely will have sort of self-awareness and rights and stuff like that. So I would say, when do we place that personhood? And in my opinion, I like to think of an organism. I mean, I would define when something is an organism.
Yeah.
Because once it becomes an organism, all the processes inside will have only one way, whether it's viable,
right,
or it dies.
Yeah, we say that there's a teleology. In other words, there is an end, there's a goal organically. Right. It's directed by the genes.
And I would put that at the minimum stage where it could start.
Right.
I don't think that we have the capacity unless we have a way to get that information from where it comes, from where it's given, which would be God in a sense. Because in the physical world, we can tell when it's a cycle, just an event, moment. As you said, like when it fuses,
yeah.
it becomes.
Perhaps the word you're looking for is individual.
Right.
When does this entity become a new biological individual? We can leave it at that, as a biological entity, because we know that the sperm is alive and we know that the egg is alive, otherwise they wouldn't be able to fertilize. But the sperm, it is an individual sperm, but it's not an individual as such, in that if I put one sperm or a million sperm in a petri dish with the appropriate nutrient, they will always remain sperm. They will not develop into a human being. The same with the egg, right? And so they are differentiated cells that they have a function, and their function is to fertilize, to fuse, and to form this new entity, individual. I don't know, anyone else?
But you know, in the beginning, you know, we have two cells in humans. But the only product of that is going to be another human. So
right. So within the human species.
Yeah. For the beginning, you know, it's going to be human, whether or not the one's going to live or not.
Right. Whether it's viable or not.
Yeah, but
right.
it's human. That won't give you a a different species or anything like that. So basically, it's going to be a human being from beginning to end.
Well, okay. What do you think?
How would you define a soul? Because I don't think that. I think many people aren't really sure that there is a soul.
Correct.
You know,
Which does not invalidate the possibility of a soul, right? Even if some don't believe in it. Some people may not believe that the earth is round, which does not invalidate the fact that the earth is round. That's not a good analogy because that's a fact. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is a belief, right? Okay. So let's look at the soul. We're in metaphysics, right? Because how much does the soul measure? Unmeasurable, and therefore it's out of the physical world. We believe that the soul exists, and so it's metaphysical. Another way of talking about the soul could be the conscience, right? Cum scientia, in other words, the capacity for knowing. And the soul actually has, or conscience, there are different types of conscience, or different aspects of the conscience. For example, there's an intellectual conscience that allows us to reason. There is a spiritual conscience that may connect us with realities beyond the supernatural realities, like a belief in God, a love for neighbor. There is an aesthetic conscience that allows us to detect beauty, right? Another branch of philosophy, aesthetics. There is a moral conscience that tells us the distinction between right and wrong, in other words, behavior, proper behavior, improper behavior. After we've grown for a while and we've become at least teenagers and adults, and even children have an intuition about what's right and wrong. It's a natural intuition generally. They might not be refined conscience, but we generally, normally don't go around just killing people or just don't walk around naked, you know, after teenage years. Most people don't go on the street naked naturally, normally. A few do, and I remember back to the time of the streakers. Remember the streakers? All they would wear was tennis shoes in the 70s, and they'd run through campus. I'm like, yeah, these streakers here. But so there's a moral conscience. All that has to reside somewhere. And this is what we call the soul, the spirit, the conscience, right? And we talk about the heart, but that's, again, analogical language, because the heart, we know that truly, really, physically is a cardiac muscle, all right? If we were to be more precise, in my opinion, it would have to reside somewhere on the brain, at the cortex, typically where we have a higher function. Yes, so what is the soul? And there is potential. So we have to, you mentioned potential earlier, and it's very important to distinguish between actuality and potentiality. And people get confused about this because they say, well, this is a potential human being, right? The zygote may be a potential human being because it has potential to develop into a human being, but that's not good philosophy. That's not good philosophical use of the word potential. We would say that the zygote is an actual human being with potential for further development, but it's already an actual human being with potential for further development. I'll give you an example that may be more clear of the born. It's like saying that a baby is a potential human being. No, a baby is an actual human being with potential for further development. How about a teenager? Teenager is not a potential human being. Some of us may think that, some of you parents may think that your teenagers are potential human beings at times. But realistically, actually, they are actual human beings which have the potential, hopefully, for developing into adults, right? So we have to be clear with the word potential because many people refer to the human embryo as a potential human being. No, this is an actual human being because there is a quid, there's a something there, there's a tissue there, there's an organ, there's a real live entity with potential for further development, okay? Potential for further development, very important. And then every stage of our life, whether born or unborn, we have a further potential. As adults, we have a potential to become senile, you know, to live out the fullness of our years. We may be cut short prematurely, but we have a potential to become old. And so be clear about actuality and potentiality. Okay?
Father, is that specifically Catholic teaching again, or is Catholic or Christian as opposed to a Judeo belief or any other religion, that some may believe it is not an actual human with potential until it's born. So are we talking specifically the Catholic belief, or is this?
The Catholic belief aligns with this philosophical view. And I would say, again, with all due respect, that the best of the Judeo tradition also aligns with this view. What I mean by the best, or in my opinion, I'm now giving my opinion, we know that just like Christianity has many different branches, which did not come from Jesus because he founded one church, and upon this church, in the singular, upon this rock, I would build my church in the singular. We have made many denominations out of that Christianity, right? So have the Jews. So that we have from the ultra-Orthodox to the Reformed, which are, believe, about 6 different branches of Judaism today. Okay? But that was not the intent of God Yahweh when he said, I will be your God and you will be my people in the singular, when he made the covenant, the ancient original covenant between God and his people, as one God and one people. So just like nature has a tendency to diversify and to go into biodiversity, we also have a tendency to go into religious diversity, whether from the ancient covenant or the new covenant. At any rate, what I say is that at least the Christian tradition and the Catholic tradition aligns with this philosophical thought. But in principle, it's a philosophical thought. It's not a theological thought. In other words, what I'm doing with you right now is I'm doing philosophy, in that this is what we call principle theology, principle philosophy, as opposed to utilitarianism, all right? Principle philosophy will espouse by certain things that are intrinsically good and certain things that are intrinsically evil. And so we can philosophize about this before the time of Christ. In fact, the pursuit of the 3 big heroes, or the 3 big ones in philosophy, in Greek philosophy, which are Western civilization is based mostly, we have that. Rarely in human history have we had 3 masters which are disciples of each other, right? Socrates, Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. And from there, we get the pursuit of principles of the good, the one, the true, the beautiful, the 4 basic truths or pursuits, which leads to a virtuous life. And so virtuous philosophy is anchored, is rooted on this examination, if you will, of the facts, and then making some conclusions about the facts. The fact is that when we look at embryonic development, including the human, we see a gradual process, which has 2 things, has cellular division, otherwise known as mitosis, and within that cellular division, a gradual also cellular differentiation or specialization into specific organs and tissues of the body. That in the human takes 9 months, to where when this entity comes out of the womb, he or she is somewhat viable, but still with a lot of help, because we cannot leave a newborn baby on the sidewalk and pretend for he or she to go any further than that, beyond a few hours. Okay, he or she still needs nourishment and protection and shelter. So this newborn is not independent. It's still very much dependent, like any previous stage.
All right, Father, so let me continue. So
So
you're saying that even assuming we're talking Western, Judeo-Christian Western, in Eastern philosophies or values, and I know so little about them, so I'm just asking, do they also consider, and I might think not, some that believe in reincarnation, that actual human potential is actually not until they or they actually don't believe they're human till they are born. Like, do any other faiths, not Christian or Judeo faiths, believe that or not believe that?
Right, and I probably know less than you do about these other religions and philosophical thoughts, but what little I've been able to glean over the decades is that it comes down a lot to an anthropology. In other words, our vision of the human person. And in general, this is a very generalized statement, but in general, these other religions and or philosophies tend to be dualistic. In other words, if they believe in a soul, certainly they will believe in an organ with a body because they can see each other and they can touch and taste each other and so forth. So there's no question in the organic reality. But if they believe in a soul, they may believe that there's a radical separation between the soul and the body, or they may not believe in a soul at all. But there is that separation pretty much like I have water in here, and so the body would be this container that has a soul poured into it somehow, all right? But there is pretty much a distinction between the physical and the spiritual realities. We in the Western world, especially in the Catholic tradition, and many Christians also, non-Catholics believe this, and some Jewish traditions also, we believe that we are soul and body one. In fact, John Paul II stressed that a lot philosophically and theologically. It's not that we have a soul as if water is poured into a glass, where the glass may have or not have water. No, we are body and soul one. There's a substantial unity so that without a soul, we're no longer human. Certainly without a body, we're not human, but without a soul, we're not human either. So there's a substantial, essential unity between our body and our soul. And that's why I'm making so much emphasis on ensoulment. Well, when does God give us that soul? To make us human, all right? And that is the Western view. So for example, Buddhism makes that separation, and that's why the Nirvana in Hinduism and the other Oriental philosophies actually abstract themselves from the physical, because they consider the physical material an encumbrance of the soul, and the soul needs to be liberated. The soul is entrapped, enslaved by the physical body. And so their whole thing is getting out of this body, getting out of this world, getting out of this universe, and going into that ethereal, spiritual nirvana, spiritual experience that is pure soul. Very different from our belief, okay? So even their philosophy it starts from different presuppositions. Again, because these are ancient philosophies and religions started before classical Greece, which is only about maybe 300-400 years before the time of Christ. So it's not even 3,000 years old. And some of these religions, look at the Chinese dynasties, 3,000-4,000 years before the time of Christ. Hinduism also. Egypt, those great civilizations, all polytheistic. And there's also a telltale, if you will. How come these philosophies, Eastern or non-Judeo-Christian philosophies, typically end up with polytheistic theologies? This is again Chaffee's opinion, but I share it with you. In my belief, after reflecting upon this, and I've been to international conferences, I was with CERN one time, invited a dialogue between science and religion. I was privileged to participate in that. We were about 20 philosophers, theologians, and empirical scientists from all over the world, including Hindus, Buddhists, certainly Jews. CERN is the nuclear reactor in Switzerland, between Switzerland and France. That was the one that, this was on occasion of the discovery of the boson particle, the Hadron Collider, exactly, right? 16 kilometers in diameter, it's just amazing. And they put together a dialogue, several sessions, several years of a dialogue between science and religion, okay? Came from them, from CERN, which was spectacular. Anyway, their view is that the material world is actually distracting. And so there's a radical separation between the spiritual and the physical. Whereas for us, in our Western thought, no. We have a unitary, what we call a unitary vision of the human person, in contrast to a dualistic vision of the human person, okay? At some point, some certain intuitions have to kick in. But consider this, they land sooner or later in a polytheistic theology, polytheistic religion. You understand what I mean by polytheistic? Several gods, even many gods.
You're saying dualism doesn't polytheism?
Ends up with that. Just historically, look at those civilizations. Again, the Hindu dynasties, the Chinese, the Egyptians, the whatever of those great, even in Mesoamerica, they were typically polytheistic, right? The Aztecs, the Toltecs, the Mayas, you name it. Incas, except for the Jewish people, which have the intuition through the grace of the Holy Spirit and Yahweh's communication, there is one God. I am the God. In fact, it's the first of the 10 Commandments, right? You shall have no other gods beside me. And that was a big emphasis. And the total struggle of the Jewish people today and the Christian people is idolatry, to absorb other gods from the surrounding cultures, to stick to the belief and to the loyalty to one God. Now, add a philosophical thought. Let's consider God for a moment. Philosophically, if God is God, God has to be what? What attribute would we posit to God? Omni, right? Omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. He knows everything. He powers everything. He has authority and power over everything. He's present to everything, everywhere. If God philosophically is God, so if God is sharing his or her power with someone else, is that a full God? It's a demigod. So if I as a God have to share power with you all guys, and we're all gods, all right, then we're all demigods. So it's not the true God. And that's why polytheistic religions, again, with all due respect, philosophically limp, because they don't have the benefit of Western philosophical thought, we can say, of the one, of a philosophical concept of one. If one cannot be, one is unique, right? And mathematically is defined by the single. This is one cup. So mathematically, one, and it's also the point physically, which is singularity, which is the origin of the universe. So if God is omnipotent, he will say, okay, let it be. Boom, there it is, the moment of singularity. All of the universe, with all of its mass and energy, concentrated in one single geometric dimension. Right now, we're in 3 dimensions, right? We're actually in 4 dimensions. We have the 3 physical dimensions of X, Y, and Z in Cartesian coordinates, but we're also moving through time inexorably, because that clock, well, that clock's actually stopped. Good clock. Thank you for suspending time for us artificially. We're inexorably moving forward. So we're not at the same spot that we were a nanosecond ago, let alone an hour or a year ago. So that's the 4th dimension, right? Okay. But 2-dimensional would be the flatness of this screen, just X, Y, right? 1-dimensional would be a single point, which is not a dot, because even a dot, I can look at it at a microscope, it has more dimensions. But a mathematical, a physical single dimension, right? That is the moment of singularity, which is in the abstract. It's a philosophical concept, which translates into a physical concept of, it's the beginning of physics, all right? But really, technically, it's pre-physics, because we can only imagine it, we can't really measure it. And that's how we believe that the universe started, simply by regression. If the universe is expanding, reversing the clock hypothetically, mentally, would imply a condensation. At the beginning, the act of creation, right? And that was the insight of Georges Lemaitre, by the way, a Jesuit, who proposed the Big Bang theory, known popularly as Big Bang, and physically and theologically as the moment of singularity. So there's a gradual, continuous process here. If we're truly faithful to the embryology, there's no one particular event that is substantially different from the previous event, because of this gradual continuity of cellular division and differentiation, organ and tissue differentiation, except for 2 exceptions. So there in a minute. Here's a little summary. During fertilization and embryonic development, there's no substantial difference that occurs during those 9 months of development. In fact, even after birth, is there a substantial difference between a child, a baby, a toddler, a teenager, a young adult, a middle adult, an old adult? Is there a substantial difference? I think that most people will agree that there is no, if they understand substance correctly. Oh? The DNA continues to say, the DNA is functioning, is transcribing and translating, it is doing the central dogma so that that organism is alive and metabolizing, all right? So philosophically to be, these are what we call arguments of logical consistency. You know, if there is a gradual process going on biologically, then we can say philosophically that we're dealing with the same entity, with the same being, substantially, in stages of development. And then we conclude that, hey, we're all in stages of development, one way or another. Every stage of our lives. Please.
If I'm understanding, what we're looking at is at a principle that we can make analogy to the minimum common denominator of autonomy in itself. Of course, that we always need feedback.
So the autonomy is not an absolute autonomy, it's a relative autonomy.
Relative to a
okay, it's a dialogical autonomy, which is more realistic. That's also, by the way, a challenge today in healthcare is the perceived absolute autonomy of the patient, which drives the doctor crazy because now the patient is driving the bus without having the benefit of medical school. So that autonomy, yes, respected, HIPAA and everything else, but it's a relative autonomy. It's a reasonable autonomy, not an absolute autonomy, because then the patient should just self-heal and we'll do away with medical professionals altogether.
I mean, in a biological sense, autonomy in a biological. That's why I said
organic, biological, genetic autonomy. Yeah.
And I define organism. Yeah. At that moment, when you have all that potentiality, as I said, no potential to develop, you might not develop, but you have all the ingredients right there for an autonomous process to go to the full stage.
Right. So can we say this? It is reasonable to assume that the new individual begins at fertilization.
Yes.
The new individual. Shaban.
Well, just you're saying, you know, do away with the doctors. That's not the same thing with the autonomy. It's basically, you know, your doctor may know more, may be able to do things, but the ultimate decision rests with the patient or whatever.
Yes.
So there is an absolute autonomy. If you can't do that, then you do have the right to say, I can't participate in your care. I will get you someone who can respect your autonomy.
Yes, yes. However, and you're a nurse, so I want to draw from your experience of decades of dealing with patients. Is it absolute autonomy or is it absolute conscience and the dictum of conscience that I need to follow my conscience as a patient? And as a patient, my conscience is telling me, do not get a cast for my arm, for my broken arm. Okay, so is it absolute autonomy or is it an absolute dictum of the conscience that I need to follow my conscience because I will be judged in my conscience? See what I'm saying?
I don't see it as a conscience at all. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think that you know, treatment you can recommend, you can do. You should not be able to impose treatment on people. People come to you for aid, you do the best, and people do surrender at some point their autonomy to your better judgment.
Beg to differ. We don't surrender autonomy. We consent.
Responsibility.
Yes, we consent, but my autonomy remains integral.
Okay, I mean,
so it's a reasonable autonomy. In other words, if it were an absolute, I know we're getting philosophical, but think about this. If it were absolute autonomy, I would be able to heal myself. That is absolute autonomy. To heal myself. Because that is absolute autonomy. I am autonomous. I am an autonomy.
Well, I don't think that's what we're talking about with autonomy.
No, that is what we're talking about. That is exactly what we're talking about.
Autonomy is the ability, the power to exert control over yourself.
Yes.
But you can be autonomous and starve to death because you can't make nature or your circumstances. But when that's why I'm saying you can surrender part of your autonomy and you can give consent, and then you have given up some of your autonomy. Because that's exactly, but saying that, I can heal myself, some people do. If it doesn't
the body generally does heal itself, right? The body, in fact, does heal itself in many cases. It does. So we're talking about something major beyond. But I would say it's a very particular interpretation that you're giving to autonomy, because we have a reasonable autonomy, okay? But to consider it absolute, we would be fully independent from everybody else. And even just not in healing, but in daily, in procuring my own food, in growing, in everything. See, that's the problem with absolutizing the autonomy, is that it paints us into a corner where we're really not capable of following through. Okay, we may have a difference on the interpretation of autonomy. And that's I know that's part of the issue with abortion, of course, because the woman is claiming absolute autonomy over her body, which, by the way, in that interpretation will make the fetus or the embryo part of her body and no individual at all. And we can say yes and no, because that embryo is growing within her, physically, physiologically, okay? And she could conceive not wanting that other creature to be growing in her. It is her body.
But if she's not...
So this question of absolute or reasonable autonomy is very much part of the abortion issue.
But it may not be autonomy if she's being coerced one way or the other.
Oh, yes.
Or unduly influenced.
That's another aspect of autonomy. If we have absolute autonomy, we would refuse or be impermeable to any kind of influence.
Not everybody has that.
None of us do. Even by the fact that we're speaking a language, who taught us how to speak? We didn't self-teach.
Right, but Father, saying somebody that you were coerced, or just the way you said that. I mean, autonomy does not mean you cannot learn, you cannot make decisions.
Oh, yes, it does. If it's absolute.
Autonomy is simply the ability. Okay.
You're absolute.
I'm reading on the definition. That's the problem.
I think so. What are you exactly saying is autonomy?
What I'm talking about is I'm making an argument for reasonable autonomy, but not absolute autonomy. Absolute autonomy is that I am fully, totally independent. That is what absolute autonomy means, okay? Which is unreasonable. So the alternative is a reasonable autonomy, okay? Autonomy, for example, one way of interpreting this in lay is to do what I want. Wouldn't that be autonomy? I want to do what I want. I want to do what I want to do. Wouldn't that be autonomy? Now, can I do what I want to do? I would love to fly, for example, but I'm not going to climb and jump because I'm not going to fly. See, so it's all how we interpret that autonomy. Do we interpret it in a reasonable way, or we absolutize it?
There's a question of, can you have freedom without responsibility? And I think it goes back to that, because it sounds like on the surface you can.
Right.
Freedom is freedom, but then do you have the freedom to run my life?
Exactly.
So you
That's
can't do that
right.
in a civilized society, in a society where where we all have to get along and work together in order to survive. So you really cannot have freedom without responsibility.
Responsibility. And that, another way of phrasing that perhaps is rights. There are no rights without duties.
Right.
Because minimally, we have the right to defend, we have the duty to defend our rights. So that's a duty already. So just to speak about rights without any duties is unreasonable. And it's uncivilized, really, because it would lead us to chaos. Like you say, no one would obey all the laws of society, the civil positive laws of society would only be suggestions and opinions, and we wouldn't be bound
There
to
is
them.
a concept of enlightened self-interest. So therefore, you might obey the laws because in your best interest, when people cooperate, people work together, there is a better, there's no I in team. So that is a possibility. So you may still be autonomous, but you may choose. That doesn't mean you're giving up your autonomy.
Where is that choice coming from within? Where's the seat of that choice? Of that enlightened self-interest? Where's the seat of that?
What you think, what you've learned.
How about the conscience?
Well, it could be a conscience. You might be, but
what else could it be?
Well, you don't know, but I'm saying everybody, well, maybe there is a conscience, maybe there isn't. What we think is, or what we determine what is right or wrong is not always, I want to say it's maybe culturally specific, different cultures.
A lot of it is, of course.
So
we're all culturally influenced, right?
Culturally influenced,
yeah.
So it's not an absolute conscience. That, something exists. I don't know, do some cultures believe that it's okay, to walk around naked, like you said? There's still, I believe some in this world still left. I mean, you go back to. How
is that choice made? You said that it could be a thought process. Could it be a thought process? How the choice is made, right? And so what would that imply? What would the individual need to make that decision? What would the individual need for the thought process to occur? Some data, some information?
I'm going to say facts.
Okay, or the perception of facts, even the perception of facts, right? Okay, so what is conscience? The etymology of the word, the origin and meaning, cum scientia, with knowledge. So that's, in ignorance, we make typically bad decisions. But with knowledge, we have a better chance of making good decisions, proper, right decisions. And so you see, that's conscience, having knowledge of something.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we all agree. C.S. Lewis said,
right.
Men can argue about that. Men
Humans.
can argue about whether you can have one wife or 4 wives, but most of them will agree you can't have the same woman you want. Most.
Most,
is,
yes.
Different cultures have different consciences of what they
yes.
accept is acceptable.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean all our consciences will agree, but we all have one. We have some sort of.
But it's still a belief.
Of natural laws that we believe in.
Yeah, and even by the way, the standard in mammals, non-human mammals, the standard is the harem. So another indirect, if you will, another indirect suggestion or pointing toward the fact that we do have a conscience is that we can make a reasonable argument for monogamy. Okay, we can make a reasonable argument for it. Anyway,
can you go back and say that again?
The standard for mammals in nature is the harem. We are mammals. And yet, we can make a reasonable argument for monogamy in humans. In other words, one man and one woman for life has a better chance in making that project of life work. The life project together of sharing not only the physical, but also the spiritual. There's a better chance. Even just at the human level, you avoid all the challenge and the difficulty of jealousy between 2 women or 2 men for the same woman, whichever way you want to put it, polyandry or polygyny. More than 1 and 1 is going to create all kinds of conflicts between those different individuals. Who's the best, who's the preferred, why are you spending more time with her and not me, etc. So even at the practical level, there are arguments in favor of monogamy. We've gone a little far afield. I actually want to land it back to the issue of twinning and even more challenging twin reabsorption with regards to the individual soul. Yes, before going there, early on was mentioned with regards to the person. We can follow one logical argument here. at the moment of fertilization, we have an individual human life, meaning a species, Homo sapiens individual. Okay. Is this human life a human being? Well, I was mentioning that being is a philosophical category, which means entity or thing. When we see a dog going down the street, we don't say, oh, look, a dog being, or a cat being, or a mouse being. We just say dog, cat, and mouse. We could say the same about the human. There goes a human, there goes a man and woman. We don't say a man being or a woman being. The adding of being philosophically just stresses the fact that this is a human thing, a human entity. So if we have a human life and it's individual, can we agree that that human life is a human being, just philosophically? Perhaps the challenge is with a human person. Is the human person, specifically the zygote? So if we posit personhood on the zygote, then we're clear for the rest of the embryonic stages. Well, we have to do a little etymology of the word, because what is not granted to the human in the United States today, and in many countries that also have legalized abortion? What is not granted to the human embryo? It is not granted human personhood, legal personhood. The human embryo is not a legal person in the United States. That is a factual statement. It's not Chaffee's opinion. Okay, we may or disagree with it. That is a factual statement. The human embryo is not a legal person in the United States. If the human embryo were a legal person, then it would be illegal to kill the human embryo. Just like it's illegal to kill any one of us without due process, right? Because what are we? As far as the law, the positive law of the United States, we are legal persons,
There are
granted by the Constitution.
For human, for fetuses, embryos, when before they're born.
Yes, and I want to get there. Yes, I agree with you 100%, and I want to get there in the second half of the lecture. I'm still with the word person, okay? That in the United States today, in any other country that abortion is legal, protected by law, it's because the human embryo is not a legal person. Now, legal is a positive law made by humans. Where? Specifically in the legislative branch of government. At the federal level, it's Congress. At the state level, is in Tallahassee, or whatever capital of the legislative body of each state. So it's a legal positive law, just like the traffic laws are positive laws, right? Okay.
So when do you become a legal person?
At birth, when the head, specifically the head comes out. That's why partial birth abortion. The body is out, but the head is not out. So literally the head. So it comes down to this. Legally, legal personhood has been granted to a human being when the head is outside of the body of the woman. Okay, that's legal. All right, now let's look at personhood. Etymologically, in other words, the origin and meaning of the word person. And for many decades, I didn't know this. I actually discovered this in the 90s when I was doing my first dissertation in Rome for moral theology. The word person comes from the Greek prosopon. Anybody know that? Person comes from prosopon in the Greek. And prosopon is the mask in classical Greek theater. So I found it fascinating. Again, the Greeks, it's amazing how they come up with zygote without the benefit of a microscope, you know, yoked or linked. How they come up with prosopon, classical Greek theater, right? What do we have? We have, first, it was actually tragedy. So the three branches of theater: tragedy, comedy, and drama, right? Originally, it was tragedy. Also because they were polytheistic and the Greek mythology was extremely rich, but it was tragic in this sense that it was we were condemned, we humans were condemned to be the puppets of the gods and the goddesses. And they basically play with us. So it was a fatalistic view of the human person. Their anthropology in that sense, sadly, was distorted, was less than it could be. And I find it so fascinating that philosophically, they were so much on the right track with pursuing the four basic principles of the one, the true, the good, and the beautiful, but theologically, religiously, as rich as Greek mythology was, it was so totally unreasonable. It was totally passionate. And the Greek gods and goddesses, you know, they fall in love, the Greek gods fall in love with human women, and they have sex with them. And the product of that sex is the heroes, like Hercules and Ulysses and all those heroes. And that's why they look human, but they had superhuman power, right? Because they were the product, and I made reference to that in Genesis about chapter 6, the sons of the gods and the daughters of women, of men, okay? The heroes of old, mythological today, to this day, with the heroes like Superman and Spider-Man, they're human, but they have all the superhuman power. It's going back to classical Greek philosophy and theater and theology, religion. Anyway, the mask simultaneously revealed and concealed. So we know that in the classical Greek theater, by the way, they were tremendous engineers also and architects. Here, in this wide open amphitheater, no ceiling, one man would be here, and it was always a man, of course, who was the protagonist, okay? One man would be talking out the play of the Greek mythology, and the whole audience all the way up here could hear them, because it was designed to carry that sound wave and naturally amplify it. It's amazing. You look at the, what's inside of there, the speakers, Boss, whatever you want, the JBL speakers, you know, top of the line. What do they have? They have this shape. So this is a speaker that they were building. Amazing. Okay, so the guy would sit here, typically sad because they went on for hours, and he had a chair and a table. And on the table, there were all these different masks, okay? And so when he was representing Neptune, he would pick up the mask of Neptune and speak out. And that was Neptune. And then when he was representing Mercury, he would pick up the mask of Mercury and speak out. That was the beginning of theater, which was tragic because always was the gods playing with the humans. Then at some point in the Bacchanalias, in other words, Bacchus, they introduced the god of wine. And what did wine do? It cheered man's heart and woman's heart too. And so they started laughing, and so they created comedy. And then kind of the mixture of the two, they came up eventually with a more realistic scenario, which is drama. You know, the joyful and the sad parts of life. The drama was more realistic, and all the novellas that you see in TV today are pretty much these dramas, what is left of classical Greek theater. But back to the prosopon. The prosopon is the mask. So simultaneously, the mask reveals the god or goddess that they were portraying and conceals the protagonist, because who cared who was behind the mask? What was interesting to the people was to hear out their mythology. All right? Prosopon. That is the origin and meaning of the word person. Today, I would say represented by our mask, which is our face, our countenance. Let's face it, from the neck down, we're pretty much the same, men and women. The men have pretty much the same in different proportions, and the women have pretty much the same in different proportions. But the face, the prosopon, you know, we have so many muscles on the face, and they're all skeletal muscles in the sense that we can move them, and we can express joy, sadness, horror. We can express 1,000 different feelings and sentiments through our face, through our countenance. And yet, as expressive as the face is, no one really knows what we are thinking, even right now, except two people, myself and God. No one really knows what we're thinking, what we're processing, except ourselves and God. And sometimes not even ourselves. And so the mask simultaneously conceals and reveals. And that is the origin of person. So legal person is one thing, but anthropological person, and this is Trophy's opinion, but anthropologically, I propose that the zygote is the human person, because simultaneously conceals, what am I looking at? I'm looking at one cell that is microscopic, that is totipotent, looks nothing like a born human, absolutely nothing. Round, circular, sphere, ball, macroscopic, totipotent, is concealing the person within. When I look at the genetics, has the same genome that every single one of my cells, same genome. So simultaneously reveals and conceals. Again, it's my opinion, but anthropological. I think there's a lot of ground for holding personhood of the human from the moment of conception, from the moment of fertilization. But people, of course, differ. And so legal personhood was not granted until birth.
So the women are saying, is their body. I mean,
It is their body.
Test, you find that that little zygote is a different being because they don't have different genetic code.
Right. So it is their body, but there happens to be another body embedded, wedged within that body. You know, that's our position anyway, in the pro-life position. But you people have been very generous with me because you have not held me to the issue of identical twinning and even more drastic reabsorption. How do we get two souls if this is human and if this has a soul and God has granted a soul? Dad gave me this and mom gave me this, and then God, as soon as syngamy occurred, God granted me a soul. How can my twin, identical twin, also have a soul if one of the characteristics of the soul is indivisibility because it's simple, has no parts? Okay, we need to do a little more philosophy. Let's go there. Okay. Characteristics of the human soul, at least some of the characteristics, human. So it has an origin in the sense that at some point we were only in the mind of God, but there was no substance. Oh, also matter and form. Remember matter and form? Just like every sacrament has matter and form, right? As the actual matter for the Eucharist, for example, is bread and wine, and the form is the words of consecration that turns that water and wine into the body and the blood of Christ. Substantially, not accidentally. Accidentally, still bread and wine. If I take a host before consecration and after consecration, and I do a chemical analysis of the host, I'm going to find starch. I'm going to find carbohydrate before and after consecration. But that is actually an accident, even all the way down to the atomic level and subatomic level. Substantially, the quid est, the substance, is radically different. Before consecration, that host is a piece of bread, unleavened bread. After consecration, if the consecration was valid, meaning that the priest was validly ordained, it is the body and blood of Christ. The body and blood of Christ, substantially. That's why we call it transubstantiation. The substance has changed, the accidents remain, all the way down to the subatomic level.
What you're explaining is extreme scenario. It's a very sui generis situation, but we can make an analogy, a reasonable analogy, that that's the case for each of us. We are matter, and we have form. Our form would be maybe the combination of that matter with the spirit.
It's the human form, yes.
Soul. So I'm more than this matter.
Yeah.
If you analyze me, you're gonna find just the molecules of life.
Right. The material, organic
Like
substance.
symbol,
Yeah.
But I'm more than that, which is
Right.
called soul. And
The added value, the plus,
correct.
is.
So we will be that, and this transubstantiation is just using those basic principles to an extreme scenario.
Yeah, to try to explain something that ultimately is a mystery. Sure. Okay, and so that's another philosophical point that does come to us from the Western civilization, meaning classical Greece originally, this thing of matter and form. But it makes sense, it's reasonable. In other words, for this cup to be cup, it needs material matter, but it's not just, undifferentiated matter. No matter is undifferentiated. Every matter has a form, which in the science we call the shape, okay, but it's not really the shape. The form that makes it cup and not cloud, all right? And that form is that integration between matter and form. For God to grant the soul, because the soul is going to be human, there has to be human matter. And that human matter is the human zygote. So that God, we intuit, of course, we're not going to tell God what to do, but we intuit that is totally ridiculous, obnoxious, for God to grant a human soul to an elephant zygote. It doesn't fit there philosophically, anthropologically, theologically, because the elephant zygote, the elephant genome is not human. Well, how about the chimpanzee? It's 99%. Oh yes, but like the French say, la petite différence, okay, 1% is a substantial difference. It's what we call a species. And so God would not grant a soul, it would be obnoxious, it would be revolting for God to grant a human soul to a chimpanzee.
Well, a human soul to a chimpanzee,
yeah.
So why not,
yeah.
I didn't mean this.
Finish your, yeah, no, do it.
Respectfully, but there's a certain arrogance about the idea that something that we posit as a belief, that it's just a belief. Yeah. We may accept it as faith, but it's a belief or whatever. But that we don't really know that we have a soul. We may believe it. And we don't know that an elephant doesn't have an elephant soul, or,
In fact, it does.
Nobody, God,
no,
maybe.
Well, that's a Thomistic view. It has what we call an animal soul. And plants have a vegetable soul. That was Thomas' pre-scientific society, 12th century medieval Europe, to kind of account for life, for the fact that it's alive, in contrast to a rock that would have a mineral soul, okay? So that reference of soul was a reference to the quid est, to the thing, that it's a thing, that it has matter and form. But yes, you say it's just a belief, but it's not just a belief, it's the belief on which the balance stands between life and death. Okay, between life and death. But all I'm positing, Siobhan, is that it's reasonable.
I don't doubt the reason. I don't doubt the reasonable, and the more that I learned, and it's sort of like the I don't want to say publicity, but the PR.
Yeah.
The elegance that you've talked about, the exquisiteness of what we've learned, does seem to look like there's a clockmaker. There is somebody smarter. There is some infinite being who has arranged all of this. That's not the doubt that I have. It's the idea that we can know it with such certainty, and there never seems to be enough room to sit there and say we are being incredibly arrogant about what we do. And maybe as we have evolved, we have become more arrogant, because at one point there were people who did believe animals and people could communicate, or there was this more simpler, we use simple in a different term, but a more basic understanding. And as we have become more things, we have sort of grown away from that, and we have become much more quote unquote, air quotes, developed.
Yes. Okay, several points, please. I don't know if you ever saw a movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy. It's a fantastic movie. You know, he does apologize to the snake, and he asks forgiveness for the snake, but then he kills the snake because he has to eat the snake. Grabs it by the tail and wham! But he does ask forgiveness to the snake, all right? Sure, fine. But look, there is one saying, and we say this even in the seminary, for those who believe, no proof is necessary. For those who don't believe, no proof is sufficient, all right? Having said that, you say, how do we know? We know, but we know intuitively. So we have deductive reasoning and we have inductive reasoning. Let me give you an example. I was using it, as a matter of fact, on the parish the other day. Is there a North Pole? Does the Arctic exist? I'm going to say the Arctic exists. Just a stupid question, please. Humor me. Does the Arctic do you believe that the Arctic exists? The North Pole exists? Yeah, okay. I've never been to the North Pole. I don't know if you've ever been to the North Pole. I've never been to the North Pole. I could question the existence of the North Pole. I've never been to the North Pole. I just have never been to the North Pole, okay? Now, what is there? There is overwhelming evidence that the North Pole exists. People have been there and they have written about it. They claim to have been there. I could or could not believe them, right? Oh, but how about the photographs? How about the satellite videos? Well, maybe NASA invented that. How do I know for sure? They say that Neil Armstrong was staged on putting his foot on the moon. You know, there's all these conspiracy theories. So why should I believe all those conspiracy theories? I have never been there. Is it reasonable for me to believe that the pole exists, that the North Pole exists? So the preponderance of the evidence, okay? Do we really know whether he killed or not killed that other human being? The preponderance of the evidence is pointing, yes, he did it or she did it. But we weren't there. And we still lock them up, right? So at some point, the argument is either reasonable or not reasonable.
The reasonable, plausible scenarios and advances, the position of the church is that it prefers because it's life and death, or we're existent or stop that existence. It prefers to err in
favor of. Yeah, that's the just in case. What if it were human and we killed it?
So it's kind of the opposite to the arrogant position. I prefer to err in abundance of caution because it's plausible. There's a chance that that's a human being.
We put that argument.
And I don't want to be a judge.
Yeah, Pascal's wages. We put it in terms of the hunter and the bush. You may have heard that one. So we're hunters, and we hear noises in the bush. We see the bush rattling, but we know there are other hunters hunting in the same region. Do we shoot or not shoot? It could be an animal, or it could be another hunter. Do we shoot or not shoot? Arrogance would shoot. Prudence would not shoot, right? It's as simple as that.
Could you comment on Jeremiah chapter 1?
Remind me what it says. Oh, my mother's womb, before my mother's womb, I knit you, before you were your mother.
So, I knew you before I formed you in my womb. Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as my.
Right. So what are these? These are biblical references in the Old Testament, right? In the Judeo tradition, to the fact that he knit us in our mother's womb, that he formed us in our mother's womb, because the Jews, like anyone else, would naturally be, amazed at the birth of a new individual that came out from in there, and that she grew. In fact, for some time, we can assume that humans didn't quite put together a copulation with pregnancy, because after all, when a woman becomes pregnant, for at least maybe the first month, 2 months, 3 months, when it starts showing, maybe months after the intercourse. So why associate the intercourse with the pregnancy? In a primitive, naive state, why associate the intercourse with the pregnancy? There's no direct evidence because the pregnancy is showing months after the intercourse. At some point, the humans figured out, hey, every time we do this, that happens. Or most of the time we do it, that happens. So they must be associated, but there was no way, a microscope at that time. The human egg from Bayer, the 1880s, okay? The human egg was not discovered until the 1880s by von Bayer. So, yes, but that's a biblical reference. What do you say to the person who, well, that's your belief. I don't believe the Bible.
No, well, I don't know the context of
for believers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, like, the soul is being created from the actual, physical being. And in this case, God's saying that, He created the soul. Actually, the actual, person, maybe he wasn't interacting with the person before it was conceived.
You're seeing God
Yes.
in time, and God is outside time.
Yeah.
So He can perfectly see us.
Sure, before and after or during.
In an instant. So absolutely, He knows. And what is going to happen to you and say that, because He's outside this dimension of time that we have.
Gentlemen, all I'm saying is that it's true. I agree, but they're still at the level of belief. So how can we present, hopefully, some kind of an argument, a reasonable argument, who don't believe? You say, well, you believe in a soul, you believe in a God, fine, dandy, go on with your beliefs, but leave me with my beliefs. That what I have inside of me is a parasite.
Yeah, I don't think it's an issue with the soul because you don't believe in the soul.
You believe in?
The soul. Like,
the soul, right.
You don't have soul.
Right.
Well, from these two cells, humans, you're not get a human. So basically, even though you don't think it's a soul,
Yeah, a human organism.
Yeah.
Right, a human organism.
What is the issue?
Exactly.
What is soul?
The issue is that human individual, I don't want him. That's the issue. I just don't want him right now. I can't handle him. I didn't want him. Of course, we say, well, you should have thought about that before the intercourse, et cetera, but it happened. And now I'm in control because I'm in absolute autonomy. Well, it's illegal to murder because it's legal to kill the unjust aggressor. It's legal to kill the unjust aggressor, self-defense, but it's illegal to murder. Murder is a legal category. So we end up with a vicious circle. We end up with a circular argument. Somehow, my only wish after being involved in this for 47 years is to try to break through the impasse and just hear out the arguments of the pro-choice. Hear out the arguments that go beyond the shouting and the emotional diatribe that they usually pour out. To this day, I've just been unable to have a dialogue.
Father, again, with all due respect, I find it hard to believe in 47 years you have not been able to have a conversation with people who support the right to
Chauvin,
without being a diatribe.
So help me God. I have spoke with abortionists, I have spoke with lawyers, I have spoken with politicians, I have spoken with pregnant moms, I have spoken with the husbands and the boyfriends and the mothers of the pregnant moms. To this day, so help me God, I have not been able to have a dialogue that we're having today. Truly,
in
honestly.
Previous classes, have you never had anybody who's pro-choice in any of these classes?
No.
Am I the first pro-choice person you've had in a class?
Yeah. So far, yes. Truly, well, the program is only 4 years old, and hopefully I'll have a whole class. Yeah. No, please bring me, because maybe this is the only way that we can do this. In a setting, in a setting like this, where we truly respect each other's opinion, we hear each other out.
I always say something very hard, because you come from a position, and when I say you, I think that we have very similar.
Yeah, the pro-lifers.
Right. We come from an absolute position. Like, you establish a point that there's no return. It's just
it's all or none.
So you start at 0. You start at 0 to 60. You're not starting at 1 or 2 or 3.
Right. It's not gradual. It's not proportional.
Subjective choice.
It's not proportional.
You start at the most, and there's no return. But the other side comes from out of left field, right field, center
many
field,
different
from
traditions.
Whatever is convenient according to the knowledge or the background or the culture,
whatever they believe at that moment.
And it's a subjective. It's subject to whatever. They might change their position. They can move from the third trimester to the second to the first.
Wait 1 second. I just want to ask. So father's position is objective or?
It's a specific. That's my point.
Okay, but it's objective, and then the opposition is subjective.
The opposition is everything that comes after. Because when can you tell me that a person becomes a person? What is the subdivision moment? At what stage from 0 to 9 months when you would assign that embryo or fetus? You are a person. You have rights. You are an autonomous being, and you deserve the protection. At what moment? And that is fine. This is just without emotion. I'm just saying that it's a fact. You have to base your argument on a reasonable position. Where you make a decision, you say, okay, I know that is at this point. At this point, I believe, and there has to be a reason. It cannot be just because you like it or because it seems, convenient. Please find a position, because that's what I'm saying with the other field coming from everywhere. Because you may assign that at day number 28. When you saw some processes in your reasoning from anatomy and physiology or embryology, that is the moment. It becomes a person. At that moment, develop a cortex, and in the thalamus, it starts creating this differentiation that is not like the one a cat or a dog has, that it gives self-awareness. And at that moment, I put a person. Therefore, I won't accept abortions before, after the second trimester. That's an example. But then comes another person that doesn't believe that and establishes up to the moment of birth. When that head comes out, that is extreme. So where and based on what? Because that is a moment of singularity at conception. From that moment, you can tell logically, without argument, and I'm a biologist, and I can tell you that I told you the story of my professor. At that moment of fertilization, this point of no return. You have an organism, in a sense, with that autonomy that, yes, it will use the environment in different ways, but it's moving forward. It's like when you start your vehicle, you either are moving or not. At the moment that you're static, and you start moving, that's a category of movement. So the point, the dialogue has to be, where do we find that personhood?
Well, no,
and allow us to start granting rights. No.
Louis, it isn't the personhood. Okay, and if you want to use the argument that I don't deny that it is a potential human being, it is a human being, it is a person. Maggie said something interesting, which I hadn't thought about earlier when she said it's stillborn. So was that a person? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I really haven't thought about it. But the issue isn't so much personhood as it is autonomy and the rights. Okay, and you mentioned this last week. There's a hierarchy of rights. So at some point there is an interest. The woman has an absolute right. At some point the state has an interest. And at the third trimester, at least in our country, the state has a compelling interest. And the only reason that you can interfere is for the life or health of the mother. Those are the hierarchy of rights that you may want to assign. I happen to believe they are actually not perfect, but they're okay. But at some point, you're saying this momentum basically denies the autonomy and the experience of women and turn them into broodmares.
Not the last part of your predicament. So the complement, I respect that position, but the final part is like I have issues with. I think that as a woman, you have.
You're not a woman.
As a woman, you are a woman. As a woman, you have this intrinsic nature to carry that process in a particular way that I, as a man, I don't have. So you are the only one so far, because science has developed. Now maybe a fetus 5 months or 4 months old in the process, you could put it in a machine and supplant the mother.
Yeah, that's official law.
We are not still.
It's going there.
In Texas, they kept a woman alive on a ventilator so that she would give birth for
I
4.5
remember
months.
that, but
Yeah.
So the woman essentially was dead, and she was basically kept as a receptacle.
but that's a natural process for the woman. You have that
She was
capacity.
dead. She was kept alive by a ventilator. She wasn't even alive. She was allowed to keep breathing by a ventilator. You basically denied any type of autonomy or respect for that woman and basically turned her into a receptacle, an incubator.
Good.
Now that you mentioned that case, Giovanna, I wanted to ask you, because I don't know, frankly, do we know if that particular woman, that case, I remember reading about it years ago, did she want her pregnancy?
No, I don't know if she wanted it. She was basically, she was a firefighter, if I remember correctly, in Texas, and she either had some type of pulmonary or
smoke inhalation,
cerebral
maybe.
aneurysm,
Right.
and they found her, and her husband basically said she would not want to be kept alive, would not want him, wanted to turn it in. The state of Texas said they would keep her alive. And I'll do more research because I really haven't thought about it in a long time. But that's one horrendous case. In this state, if you are in an accident and you are pregnant, do not resuscitate. Your rights as a woman to your mental, to your physical treatment can be overridden because you are pregnant. So we do have some protections. You do have some ideas, and the autonomy of women is not always respected.
Okay, so just hypothetically then, in the case of the woman in Texas, the firefighter, if she had expressed desire to keep her pregnancy, if she wanted to have that baby, would you have kept her dead alive? Would you have kept? Would you have done the intervention?
If that was her wish and she was able to, she was ventilated, yes, I probably would have allowed if that was her express wish. But when she was dead.
Okay.
So.
Okay, I just wanted to know that. So in other words, it's totally dependent on her wishes.
Yes.
And would the husband have anything? Let's assume that they were actually, let's say, legally married. It wasn't just a boyfriend.
No, she's the next of kin.
Right.
I mean, if he's the next of kin, then as the surrogate, you do respect her rights in the next.
So if the husband would want it, if she had not expressed, I'm just pushing the envelope here, but if she had not expressed an opinion either way, but the husband did want the child, would you then support her pregnancy?
Yeah.
Her being
I mean, I think she doesn't make her any less an incubator, but you are respecting the wishes of the person
but she's still,
to make that decision.
Okay, thank you. But clinically, she's still an incubator.
Oh yeah, she's still dead.
Right. Okay, so we have a cadaver, right? We no longer have a person because the person dies with death. We have a cadaver used as an incubator, which is okay if she wanted the child, but not okay if she didn't want the child. So I'm just trying to land it right. So it's all on her wish, and if her wish was not known, it was on his wish.
Well, yes, that's how surrogacy works.
Okay. That's very important. That's very informative because then we're going to use that also with Terry Schiavo when we get to the end of life fiction, the second half of the semester.
That was her husband, not her parents.
Yes, and it was Michael who wanted her
Michael,
disconnected and so forth. So we can come down on the side of Judge Greer for or against. We'll get there. So I'm just kind of linking, the parallels. All right. We have gotten into next topic, but I do need a little break. And also, even though you're not holding me back to this installment thing, just for the sake of completion, I need to put it into the recording, okay? Because I think you've actually been very kind to me in not holding me with the installment thing. How do we justify immediate installment in identical twins, and even more so in twin reabsorption? All right, this is what I mean. We have two types of twinning, dizygotic and monozygotic. Actually, conjoined, which is a special case of monozygotic, right? Okay, so let's go there. Dizygotic, two eggs were ovulated in that particular cycle, and because there are millions of the sperms around, the 2 eggs got fertilized, the 2 eggs developed into 2 embryos, all right? And so these are dizygotic twins, di for 2 zygotes, because there were 2 eggs that matured, that fertilized. Does that, I don't know, does that happen from opposite ovaries, where a woman ovulates 2 or more eggs, or is it still the same ovary? Anyone know? The same ovary?
I don't know for sure.
That ovulates 2, or is it both ovaries? That's my belief, that they alternate normally on the cycle. And so I was just curious if it was both ovaries that are ovulated simultaneously, or both eggs came from one. Maybe both cases exist. I don't know. Anyway, it's just a biological curiosity, because the cycle is so, you know, precise and complicated for everything to happen properly. At any rate, those are dizygotic twins. So ensoulment here, immediate ensoulment is no problem, because we have 2 zygotes, 2 souls granted by God from the beginning, blah, blah, blah. 2 embryos come out 9 months later, with each one with their individual soul. How about monozygotic twins? Because monozygotic twins, and that's why, by the way, identical twins, you know, they can be, I mean, it's fraternal twins, they can be boy-girl, because they come from 2 different sperm, right? Monozygotic twins, single fertilization, single zygote, 1 soul, which can then split up to 2 weeks after fertilization, depending on when they split, whether they share a placenta or not, okay? But basically, it could be at the morula stage, at the blastocyst stage, or at the gastrula stage. But the point is that these twins come from a single zygote, that's what they call monozygotic, and they are identical. So necessarily they have to both be boy or both girls, etc. Single soul. 9 months later, 2 individuals. 1 soul, 2 souls, 2 half souls that split. The soul is indivisible. It's simple. Haploid souls. Yeah, exactly. Maybe the soul is diploid. Interesting. Yeah, in a sense, the soul is diploid in this sense. No. This is where theologians run aground because they don't know the biology. And this is where the biologists run aground because they don't know the theology. So here's the benefit of bioethics, who has a PhD in theology and a PhD in biology. 1 zygote, 1 soul. When the split happens, we have a new individual. New individual, new soul. Who tells God that he can only donate a soul with a single cell? He can donate a soul with multiple cells. When the second individual comes to being, when the split happens, now we have 2 individuals. Hypothetically, logically consistent. One of the individuals remains with the original soul. The second individual immediately receives a soul from God at the moment of the split. Not necessarily. Why? It's a single soul, it's a single individual, is simple, indivisible, has an origin and no end, in the sense that lives eternally. So one of the 2 individuals has the original soul, the other individual receives a soul from God immediately upon the split. The only thing we don't know is who has what, but who cares? They are both born with a soul, they're both souled, and continue forward. It makes sense. Now, tell me to prove it to you. I can prove it, but intuitively. You know, in other words, I'm giving you an argument of induction, not deduction, because I cannot go in there and measure to see who got the soul and who didn't get the soul. But it makes sense. In other words, it's the same argument that I'm using for the initial soul. Upon the split, immediately upon the split, God grants a soul to whichever of the 2 needs a soul. And it could be either one. We'll never know which one. It's an individual soul. It's simple, indivisible, personal, eternal.
Well, if your argument earlier when you talked about, I guess, John Paul II,
right.
John Paul II said they were
body and soul one.
Body and soul one.
Right.
So then how do you?
We have a new individual. We have a new body. We have a new individual. The thing, maybe the trick is this, realizing the split, because the split is happening. You know, in fact, we can argue this, at least before implantation, what is keeping that morula together? And even the blastocysts. Organically, physically, tell me, because I taught you this. The cluster, the zona and the corona. The zona pellucida and the corona radiata, which are holding first the zygote, then the morula, and then the blastocysts. They're holding that cluster together. Remember when I showed you those slides? Okay, just go back once here for a moment, please.
Well, definitely, that doesn't contradict the biology.
No.
Biologically, they are genetically almost identical.
Yes, well, no, they are, yes, almost identical. In fact, the genome would be identical, but for some spontaneous mutation, some possible mutation. Yeah. And also, excuse me, the recombination also. Okay, remember when I showed you this? We went into fertilization and the cluster, right? So here's the ovum, but it's not by itself. It has the zona pellucida and the corona radiata. Remember? So it's a cluster, it's a cumulus. And even in the film, you notice how the hatching occurred? The blastocyst left behind, right? The film with the acid rock, remember? How it hatched, he or she hatched, left behind the zona and the corona. So up until the blastocyst stage, what is keeping that little embryo together, physically, organically, biologically, is the zona and the corona. There could be a compromise on that zona and corona, a weakness whereby they give and the separation becomes radical into two new individuals. But we know for a fact, clinically established that up until the second week, I don't know exactly how they have measured this, the scientists, maybe from spontaneous abortions, but up until the second week, even in the gastrula, where you already have a longitudinal development, that little embryo can split into two and two new individuals. It means that the cells have that much plasticity in them to become two new individuals. And so quite simply, when the split happens, we now have a new individual. Who knows which was the new one? But it doesn't matter, existentially it doesn't matter, as long as they both end up with a soul. Maggie?
Okay, so we know that monozygotic twins, we know how that happens, right?
Yeah.
Monozygotic twins, they don't really know how that happens, right? They just
know
that
they
it
do.
occurs.
They know, because, well, how? There has to be a split somehow. Right. And we all know post facto, obviously, because no one was there to observe the process as it was happening. But we know post facto because the genome is like that. That's why they're identical twins. They're monozygotic, and that's why they're so revered by the scientific, by the medical profession, because they can do this twin testing, the twin protocols, twin studies.
Okay, so if it's genetic, which I didn't think that was proven, but whatever. If it's genetic, then the split is going to occur. It's already there. So maybe the souls are already there.
No.
Be twins or triplets or quads.
No. That would be a philosophical fallacy, because I would say that the split, there's a potential for split, in the sense that we all have that potential, and it's never always genetic. It's always genetic and environmental. It's the interaction. It's actually in the interaction, because one thing is the gene and the other thing is the gene expression. And so we at the zygote, we all have the 20,000 genes potential for expressing, but unless we get the environmental factors to trigger that expression, it ain't gonna happen. It's not enough, it's necessary, but not sufficient to have the 20,000 genes. We also need the environmental, I'm talking even, the environment could even be the cytoplasm.
So it's
on the gene to express. In the mind of God only.
Well, of course, but I'm just saying biologically,
exactly.
There's nothing genetically there that's going to split.
To this day, nothing has been discovered.
Okay.
All right. Okay. And so, and even I can even put a statistic to that, because what I've heard is 1 in 64 human pregnancies are identical twins.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
That's a high percentage.
That's right. It's not even 1 in 100. It's more than 1%. It's amazing. You know, I ran into that in the 90s when I was doing my first dissertation in Rome.
Okay, so let me tell you, this is story I heard is probably from Weinstein.
Yeah.
But the idea of why the egg splits,
Hmm.
and I guess it can't be true because it splits later. But the story is that the sperm hits the ovum so hard that it splits it.
Okay.
So that's why I think they're so virile if they have identical twins. Because their sperm is really powerful.
that is the ultimate vigor, right? That is the
So there's no
ultimately vigorous sperm. At least it doesn't go through the egg and keeps going. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah, you also hear about, now we can go from the sublime to the ridiculous, of certain positions that would predispose a boy versus a girl during the intercourse. I don't know that there's any scientific proof to that, because at least morphologically, the X sperm and the Y sperm look identical. Mm-hmm.
But do they swim as fast?
Right. Good question.
You know?
Also, what do we men do with that X chromosome? Because we're not half men and half women. Okay? That X chromosome becomes condensed and locked up from the zygote. It better not express, otherwise it's going to be ambiguous. And when it does express, we'll get the ambiguous genitalia and we'll get the ambiguous morphologies. Okay? But women also have two X's. And one of those X's also has to be condensed and shut down totally. Otherwise, women will have a double load of femininity. And we have enough with one load of femininity. It would be super women. Okay. And that's the X chromosome. So one of the X chromosomes in the men and in the women has to be shut down for it to be normal. Interesting. Okay. So it's the one case in the pairing where the pairing is obnoxious. It's too much. In the rest of in the other 22 autosomes, the pairing is a good thing because of recessive and dominant recessive. Okay, so up until 2 weeks, etc. Now, I've given you that scenario, so hopefully now you're all fully convinced how identical twins may have a soul each, fully, totally, from the beginning, given by God at the split. Now, just to conjoined, it's a challenge. It's a special case of identical twins who did not separate fully. Different types of conjoin where the conjoining happens, right? These two girls, I believe they were in Guatemala. Hope and Faith, yeah, a few years ago, they got separated clinically, medically. So that's a success story. That's because all the major organs and systems of the body, each one of them had their own organ systems, okay? Duplicates. Unlike Abby and Brittany, who from the neck down share single major organs, single heart, single lungs, single liver, etc. Would you say that this is one individual or two individuals? What's your intuition? Are Abby and Brittany one or two people? One or two persons? And why is it? It's because of the prosopon. It's because of the face, the countenance. From the neck down, they are the same thing. The prosopon, the mask. They are two individuals. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I would give my life to say that they are two individuals. Do they have one soul? My intuition is that they have two souls. And in their glorified body, after the resurrection of the dead and the second coming of Christ, my belief is that they will have their own body, fully, totally glorified. That's my belief.
So the soul supersedes the body.
It does, but it's inexorably attached to the body. And so that makes death a real mystery because it's a separation and it's a radical separation. So the cadaver does not have a soul, doesn't have one iota of the soul. And the soul, upon death, does not have one iota. There's not one single cell of the cadaver in the soul temporarily, somehow, even though it has gone into eternity temporarily. So how do we explain the second coming in chronologically? Because it hasn't happened yet.
He came back glorified.
Exactly.
Body.
Exactly.
With some properties that were perfected from his original appearance.
That's right.
So that is a glimpse into the future.
And is that a coincidence that today we're actually celebrating the conversion of Paul before the risen Christ, which, by the way, there was no horse, at least in the biblical narrative, okay? He fell to the ground. There's no horse. Yeah. Is it a coincidence that we're celebrating today the conversion of Paul, who is looking at that glorified body and is going, mea culpa, I need to stop persecuting these guys, these wackos, because they're in the truth. They're in the right.
Sometimes the confusing thing is that, they couldn't recognize Christ.
Yes, ambiguous.
Why was so different?
They were joyful and fearful because they thought they were seeing a ghost, a phantasm. And so he says, his first words, the risen Christ, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Give me something to eat. There's nothing more human than eating. You are the wounds. All right? Exactly. Thomas.
Mary Magdalene, she couldn't recognize Christ.
Yes, at first. And then when he says to her, Mary, calls her by name, personal, and she says to him, Rabboni, my Lord, Master. And she runs. And what do the other guys do? What does she know? She's just a woman. She's imagining things. She loved him too much. And then they run to the tomb. So beautiful, when we see it. But the Bible, sacred scripture, was written by people of faith for people of faith. They weren't out to prove any geography, history, biology, or astronomy. They were out to preserve this great mystery that they have received, which is that God has become human. That's what they were out to do. So it's a book of faith for people of faith. And the facts make sense. The fiction doesn't make sense. And that's why when we hold the fiction to fact, we run aground. Because the dinosaurs and the humans, with all due respect, they just didn't coincide chronologically. At least the evidence that we have today, the overwhelming, propounding evidence, it ain't there. They're separated by millions of years.
Part of what we call fiction is that we haven't proved that yet, or we haven't seen it. Like
yes.
You talk about the transubstantiation of the bones. There's scientific proof that that's the body.
That's right. It doesn't weigh more or less, even though some people have tried to weigh it before and after.
But there are so many, Eucharistic miracles over the years, and there's two major studies done on hosts that they have bled, and they found that this tissue, actual blood, actual cells, that's recorded.
It still takes belief in that report. That is not being faked.
That is not a dogma of the church.
Well, it's not a dogma, but it's happening.
Well,
it's
you believe that it's happening.
Dogma. It's a personal revelation.
It's not that I believe or not.
It's a personal revelation.
In that case, the host bled.
Yeah.
So it was taken to a lab and tested. And they found that there was actual tissue for the heart.
But you believe that report is true. What if that report was fake? The skeptic.
Well, it's not that I believe, that was done by scientists.
When you were at the lab, did you do the study? See what I'm saying?
Yeah, but
we didn't do the study.
But the study was done by, it was a blind study. It was this is a host, tell me what it is. Well, give it to the lab, say, well, do an analysis of this. What is this?
Yes.
And they found that, that's this tissue. This is tissue. So they made a report and everything.
Right.
And after the fact, they were told, this came from a house.
Exactly.
So, and that's recorded.
Yes.
And that's, following all the steps.
I know. What I'm saying, Jorge, is that for a skeptic, or what we call today kind of like a secular humanist, all right, that everything ends at the grave, that person will still say to you, you believe that that report is true, but did you do the study? And we would have to say, I did not do the study. Okay, then how do I know 100% that that report is true. It could have been made up with all the scenarios. And we can say the same about the Bible too. We can say that it has been made up. And my counter to that is, yes, how come this made up report has moved millions of people, billions of people to give their life for that human being who we call Jesus? How can it be that so many people have been moved to believe throughout the whole world?
Well, so many people are more Muslims than Catholics or Christians, so you could make the same argument that, again,
that they're in the right.
I'm not being disrespectful when I say the PR is better, but the fact that there are people who are compelled and who believe and are able to convince, to sway, to be an example for other people. But it's a powerful lesson. And again, you go back to why if God didn't exist, man would create him. Is
yes, exactly. And that's my constant concern, is to debunk creating God in our image. Because that's idolatry. Right?
Oh, you mean
creating God in our image? Yeah, what you said. If God didn't exist, we would create him. Because we have a need. Yeah, that is, that is one of the arguments.
I think, the most
I'll get to you.
Catholics and Christians, we're here because by faith, because we have seen those miracles or anything like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, the church started with, just faith. They didn't see, those proof.
Exactly.
Proof.
It was all pre-scientific. It was totally pre-scientific. And they were people of faith. They walked in faith.
And I think that these miracles are happening for difference, that we are people, saying, we
right.
don't believe because, we don't see it or stuff like that.
Right. In fact, miracles, and this is Catholic teaching, is that the miracle happens as a consequence of faith and not vice versa. Because if the miracle is going to give me the faith, then why do I need faith? It's not faith. I have the proof. Okay. But the miracle typically is a consequence of the faith. You have been healed because you believe. Right? And it's very important to keep that sequence in the proper sequence. Because otherwise, St. James says, if you show me your faith, show me your acts, I'll show you my faith. If we had proof that God existed, or that Jesus Christ was divine or rose from the dead, like the Shroud of Turin, all right, which is a object of veneration. But if that, look at the Shroud of Turin. I presume you're all familiar somehow. You've heard of the Shroud of Turin. It is the image. First of all, they say that it is not a photograph, that it is an image, that they've done carbon studies on it. They've done imagery studies on it. There's no pigmentation as painting. It's like an X-ray, basically. The fiber, it's animal fiber, I think, is actually changed. Typical would be similar to like an X-ray going through it, would change the fiber to make a negative, to make a shadow, like a negative.
The passing of energy. Very intense.
It has energy that changes the chemical structure. And gives like a negative. Right, okay, that's one. In addition, there's some pigmentation on it, which could be the blood. So at the end of the day, we can say, what about the Shroud of Turin, which is like a sheet folded like this and over the body itself. So it's very long. It has the back of the body and the front of the body, all right? The cadaver folded like this. It shows the scourging, the marks of the scourging, which, by the way, were from head to toe, all the way down the back and the front of the body, because according to the biblical narrative, he was scourged naked from top to bottom. It shows the nail marks back here, because if it was here, this would have ripped through the cross by the weight of the body, so they had to be right through here. And it's showing the marks that are described in Scripture. The one thing that the shroud, and it was dated back to about 2,000 years ago, including the pollen grains of pines that they have found embedded that date to about 2,000 years ago in the area of Palestine. All right? So those are all the scientific studies, many more scientific studies on the Shroud of Turin.
Multiple spores.
Yes,
of
different, right.
Multiple spores
right.
of different species that you only find
in Palestine area and date to about 2,000 years ago. So what can we say from all that? That this is the cloth that enveloped someone who was scourged and crucified in Palestine 2,000 years ago. The shroud cannot tell me that that was Jesus Christ, because there were thousands of people who were crucified in Palestine 2,000 years ago. The Roman Empire, when they were building the road from Rome to Brindisium, my dad was from Brindisi, the slaves rebelled. So the legion took that batch of slaves and crucified them along the road. And then they took another batch of slaves and paraded them up and down the road, the dirt road, to see what would happen if they would rebel. And that other batch of slaves was the one who finished the road with the stones. That was the Roman Empire. That was the time of Christ. So thousands of people were being crucified left and right, and one of them was, involved in this shroud by some relative or friend.
But that was preserved by several people, over the
yes,
centuries.
The belief.
That, that's what it is.
Yes, including convents and monasteries, and it was in a case, in a coffin, and it survived fire and floods and all that.
So it's like a timeline.
Yes, yes.
And this unique, there's no other one.
Yes,
Like that.
correct. So we believe that was the shroud of Jesus Christ. But I cannot place my faith on the resurrection of that shroud, because if the shroud didn't exist, where's my faith? See what I'm saying? If there is proof, faith is useless.
Sometimes we forget that faith is a gift. It's a gift.
Also, together with hope and charity. That's why they're theological virtues. They involve grace.
We may be talking and trying to convince people or more of walks of life. If that faith is not infused in the person.
Correct.
And there's no words.
But that has to do, yes, Luis, but it has to do with our image of God. Because we assume that God grants the grace, and that's why they're called theological virtues, as opposed to the cardinal virtues, like justice and prudence and so forth, that we can develop on our own. But theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, have to be infused by God. And that's what we call grace. Gratis, free. He gives them to us freely. However, we assume that God infused faith, hope, and charity on every human being. Otherwise, God would be cruel, because my salvation is dependent on my faith. See, so we assume so as to not to make God cruel, because there's nothing more cruel for God than to prevent someone from obtaining eternal life. And that's why, that's another argument against delayed ensoulment. What if that little embryo dies before, like a stillbirth, before birth, and didn't have a soul? Then that human is locked out of the possibility of redemption, of living eternal life, all right? And there's nothing more cruel that I can imagine for God to do than to deny eternal life to a person from the get-go, the possibility of redemption. That's why theologically we place ensoulment at the beginning. So twins, if we hold even conjoined, right? If we hold that God infuses that soul upon the human, upon the split, as long as the head, at least, and a functional brain, somehow functional, we can assume that there are two souls there. In fact, this whole thing of conjoined twins have been worked out in embryology. It all has to do with embryonic disc, that is called. This little embryonic disc is the beginning of the gastrula, gastrulation, the inpouring of the ectoderm to form the neural tube and all that, right? So because the splitting can happen even during gastrulation, that's how we get the conjoined twins. Okay, so it all depends how the embryonic disc is split or duplicated, if it stays attached or fully detached and so forth, what organs they're going to share, what systems and so forth. So all has been worked out according to the embryonic disc. And these are the possibilities, whether they're ventral or dorsal, and subcategories within. Some are much easier to separate than others. If they're sharing an actual head, it is so challenging. So challenging. All right? And in some cases, we don't really know. Is this one or two humans? Or is it just the face that is there?
Well, what would happen if one of the two faces' heads had some sort of traumatic brain injury? you know, if,
Yes.
if the brain, I mean, I can't imagine, but you know, what you think about how the
Yes.
body, brain and the lower brainstem, if
Yes.
something happened, would the body die? Would just that head die? What would happen?
Exactly. Was that a human being or not? Another way of asking the question perhaps is, when do we have a human being? And I'll show you a case that's in twin reabsorption in a minute. Okay, so yes, yeah, very good, valid question. All right. And we have to admit that in some of these cases, we just don't know. But really, who cares? As long as God knows, because I'm not in charge of anybody as a soul. Okay, as long as God knows, he can figure it out. But look at this. Twin reabsorption is more challenging. What is resorption or reabsorption in human embryology? It's called vanishing twin. Here's the forming twin. You can see this in ultrasonogram. This is a sonogram. Okay, there's a spinal cord, etc., the jaw, and this little mass here is known as a vanishing twin. May have been a twin early on and is getting reabsorbed. Look at that. This is obviously a human being here, okay, with something growing on his or her back. Now, this creature is so grotesque that perhaps this was not a human being. In other words, this may not have had a soul. This may not have had the full genome possible for receiving, may not have had the matter to receive the form of a human. Okay?
What would how did it first start?
Exactly.
So didn't it have to
So
have
this one,
fertilized
this would have been a fertilized egg, right? This would have been a fertilized egg, in other words, a zygote, single zygote, which at some point split, but conjoined, not fully split. Obviously, it's not fully split. It's still attached, so it's conjoined. So this person, we can assume logically that he or she has a soul, the original soul. Did this creature ever get a soul or not upon the split? Again, I'm not able to say, but God knows. God knows if this little creature got a soul upon the partial split, if he was human enough to get a soul and then died in the reabsorption process. And that's what I'm going to propose, that even for reabsorption, we could still maintain the singularity of the human soul at fertilization or at individuation. And then that soul, that body dies, and the soul goes to the mercy of God, to God's plan. Here's another example. And these are photographs, so we know that this actually exists, or we believe that this was not photoshopped, right? That this is not photoshopped, because this can be done with Photoshop. So assuming that this is a true, real photograph, I say that this is a baby, that this is a human being. Her prosopon or his prosopon looks pretty good. Okay, so I would say that this little baby has a soul, is an ensouled human. How about this fellow here? Has a face, somewhat deformed, has parts of a face. I don't know if there are any eyes behind his eyelids. I don't know if there's a fully functional human brain behind this. I really don't know. I tend to say not. It looks hydrocephalic to me. Certainly with no support system, so non-viable. The least we can say is that this human is dead. And we're now looking at a cadaver which has maintained a facial expression. There's no support. So this is non-viable. Did he or she live for a time? Maybe in the womb, a few days, a few weeks, a few months, maybe. But at some point, he or she died, or is dying even right now. Non-viable. Therefore, if he or she was human, had a soul, died, that soul went to the same place where our soul is going, to the mercy of God. And in the second coming, at the resurrection of the dead, and the final coming of Christ, the end of times, if he or she was human to begin with, would then have a glorified body to to live eternally. At least to me, I don't know, but at least to me, the argument has logical consistency. Has logical consistency with maintaining ensoulment either at fertilization or at individuation. So this is the result. For monozygotic twins, we begin with one soul at the zygote level, or even further, when the split happens, whenever the split happens, within the first 2 weeks from all evidence so far, we have two souls, two individuals, they're born, they live, they're around us. For twin reabsorption or resorption, begin with one soul, we have a split. It's a partial split because they're conjoined, but we have two souls, you know. We agree that, I think it's reasonable to agree that they have two souls, they have two souls, they have two souls, they have two souls, all right? And they're conjoined. Some are splittable, some are not splittable from the neck down. So we have two bodies, two souls, two persons anthropologically. Then reabsorption, one way of looking at resorption or reabsorption of one of the twins is that that twin dies dead. When they die, that soul goes to the mercy of God. And the other soul, the surviving twin, continues with her soul until God calls that one. At least to me, there's a logical consistency to this argument. And I only need to posit immediate ensoulment, whether it's at the zygote level or any time afterward at individuation. The earliest that we can posit individuation is at fertilization. The latest is after the split has happened, whether it's a partial or a full split. Okay, it's been a little strong, tough on the theological and on the philosophical. So how about we take a little break and we'll come back to the hot topic for about half an hour. Okay. Actually, we have until 12:45, but we're going to look at abortion next. Okay, so please, 5 minutes quickly and come back. Pause for quick. Okay, welcome back then. And now we're going to go into the topic of abortion, the bioethics of abortion. All right. First of all, I want to say that this is a very delicate, complex issue that has been raging in this country ever since the legalization of abortion in 1973, precisely January 22nd. Luis, those are for you. Everybody has, I gave several copies. Thank you. All right, so I think it's very important to approach this topic with tremendous respect and consideration that there are real live human beings that are involved in this, beginning with the mother who is pregnant, the unborn that we hold is a human being, and also many other people in society that are associated with the pregnant mom. Could be her husband, could be her boyfriend, it could be her parents. Then we expand from there. Doctors who perform abortion, who have gone through medical training and embryology and everything else, and they still do it because they believe that women have this right. Politicians who support it, and legislatures, and even all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. Precisely in 1973, 47 years ago, almost to the date, January 22nd. We're now on January 2025. It's not by coincidence that we cover this topic today. I think it's just providential that it happens this way. Perhaps to reiterate, we have the normal fertilization occurring in the ampulla of the fallopian tube. and then that embryo begins developing until he or she implants on an average of 5 to 7 days after fertilization into the endometrium, the inner lining of the uterus. We're going to look at some medical terminology. So first, the biology, the clinical aspect of abortion, briefly really, and then the bioethical analysis itself. We're going to look at some abortion methods, again, medically, clinically, and finally, alternatives, right? Alternatives to abortion. And again, always clarifying, there's a little statement attributed to Thomas Aquinas, who you may know was the great systematizer of theology for the Catholic Church back in the Middle Ages, 1200s, Dominican friar. Thomas Aquinas is quoted as saying, never deny, seldom accept, or seldom affirm, and always distinguish. So for him, it was all about making distinctions, Thomas Aquinas, right? Never deny, seldom affirm, and always distinguish. It was a phrase attributed to him. So we're going to make some distinctions here between a spontaneous abortion and a procured abortion, because bioethically, it's quite distinct. One, there may be culpability, at least objectively, it is the killing of a human being. The other one is allowing or accepting the death of a human being. So a spontaneous abortion, which later on in the embryonic process is called a miscarriage, it happens naturally. That's why it's called spontaneous, is a spontaneous loss, like a stillbirth. The embryo, the fetus died, was discarded by the mother, or sometimes not discarded, but there was no wrongdoing, there was no culpability, there was no action, intention that was done to kill that embryo, that fetus, unless, of course, you know, the mother was totally irresponsible for her behavior, like she went horseback riding, galloping when she was 7 months pregnant or something like that. Not advisable, right? Okay, so assuming that the mom did not do anything to procure that spontaneous abortion or miscarriage, it is a sadness. That child was lost, but the child died, was not killed. Different from a procured or elective or induced abortion, different terminologies to indicate the same reality, that there was some human action done to terminate that life, to kill that life, all right, to end, to stop that life of that unborn. So it is the second case that we're interested in, that we're concerned here, precisely to try to present the arguments in favor of life and hopefully convincing some people to not procure an abortion or an elective or induced abortion. First, I want to point out that these contraceptives may also have an abortifacient effect. All right, now we're going to be swimming against the current here, including the government current of, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that considers the IUD, for example, and certainly the pill, strict contraceptives. But we're holding that in addition to the contraceptive effect, they may also have an abortifacient effect. For example, the pill. The pill is typically 99% effective by their clinical facts, by the little fact sheet that comes with it, all right? Which usually, I always forget to bring one, but when you look at the little fact sheet that comes with all medications, all right, it's typically you fold it out and it's a page, front and back, with point size of maybe 6 or 7 point size, all full of the contraindications and what can go wrong. First of all, you can die from this. If you don't die from this, you can get blood clots, you can get this, that, because we know they're trying to cover themselves legally, and also buyer beware, right? They're told, they have been told, the client, the customer, the patient, what can happen to them, all the negative side effects. So if they consume the product, they have been informed. It's informed consent. All right. So even the pill, let's say it's 99.99% effective. There is still that 0.001% of a woman taking the pill, religiously. In other words, every day at the same time of day for the whole cycle. In other words, she's 100% compliant. 1 in 100, at a 99% rate, 1 in 100 women taking the pill will get pregnant. If you want to put it, I don't know where you want to put it, wherever you want to put it, it's a conceptual thing. You put it at 99.9%, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000. The point is that some women taking the pill consistently get pregnant. And there is a biological expression of that. It's called breakthrough ovulation. Breakthrough ovulation. And this is the biochemical procedure, most likely, that the body is designed to work in a certain way. And so I'm talking about normal, average men, women, all right? Because there are always going to be abnormalities of the curve, but I'm talking about the norm. The norm is that once a woman reaches menarche, she starts ovulating on average once a month. Let's say the ovaries alternate, that's intuitive, that makes sense, so eventually both ovaries run out of eggs. And then we call that menopause. So during those fertile years, on average, a woman will be producing 1 fertile egg a month. The pill is typically a high dosage of estrogen, or it actually mimics the cycle, but it mimics like the pregnant cycle. So it fools the body into being pregnant. In other words, it's sending a biochemical signal to the ovaries. You're pregnant, don't waste any more eggs. Hold your eggs, stop ovulating because you're pregnant. So it fools the body into thinking that it's pregnant, all right? So ovulation is suppressed, but it's suppressed artificially by overriding the signal by an artificial supply of the estrogen, which, by the way, you can see it here. The estrogen is marked Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of the first week, and second week, and third and fourth week. And this pill has to be taken this day and not the next or the following day because it won't work. In other words, there are different dosages of estrogen in each one of the 30 pills. Mm-hmm. And that's why if it's taken out of sequence, I forgot to take it today, I'll take it tomorrow, doesn't work. It has to be, that's why we say consistent behavior, right? Compliant. Even so, there is this breakthrough ovulation, which means that the body somehow, the ovaries, override the artificial signal that they are receiving from the pill and still ovulate. That's why it's called breakthrough ovulation, because it overrides the signal, the artificial signal, simply because nature is tenacious and nature is stubborn, and it tries to do its thing despite of it, despite of the artificiality of the estrogen. If it happens that that woman who has been taking the pill every day consistently has intercourse, she may get pregnant, and she gets pregnant because of the breakthrough ovulation, because on average, if there are millions of sperm around, whatever egg is around is going to get fertilized. And so now she has an embryo who is traveling 5 to 7 days to the endometrium. What happens at the endometrium? At the endometrium, so the estrogen signal is not only for the ovaries, it's also for the endometrium. All right? And what happens is the endometrium starts sloughing off, starts losing its sponginess and its vascularity. We call it inhospitable. The endometrium, the inner lining of the uterus, becomes inhospitable to the little embryo, to the blastocyst. So the blastocyst will be discarded, see, because the endometrium is not hospitable to receiving, not receptive to that implantation. Oh, professor, that's a spontaneous abortion. It's just naturally been discarded. No, with all due respect, there's nothing natural about what's happening. If the woman had not been taking the pill, that endometrium would have been, in a natural ovulation, would have been hospitable on average to implantation. And so, excuse me, the woman has to take responsibility when she's taking the pill, not only for suppressing her ovulation, but also for rendering her uterus inhospitable, which is part and parcel of the whole process. And therefore, that failing implantation, that discarding of the embryo, that abortion is not a spontaneous abortion, it is a procured abortion. because had the human will not been involved, on average, that embryo would have implanted into a receptive uterus, okay? Again, very respectfully, if we follow it through, that is an abortifacient effect. Of course, the FDA denies that because they consider now they are redefining fertilization to include implantation. So if there was no implantation, there's no completion of fertilization. Because of course the early embryo doesn't have a human status, doesn't have a legal status. Yes, it's ideology. That's why I made emphasis on syngamy. Oh, excuse me. I made emphasis that syngamy completes fertilization, biological, embryological. Syngamy completes fertilization, so by the time we have a functioning zygote, by the time the zygote undergoes the first cleavage, within 24 hours of the mitosis, fertilization is done, forever, completed, over. And so the implantation that may or may not happen 5 to 7 days later has nothing to do with fertilization. It's done, it's over, okay? And so it is true abortifacient effect of the pill, and just from their own statistics in their fact sheet. Similar case to the IUD, only even more so, because the IUD, the copper T, what it does is it actually, because it's inserted into the uterus, as you can see here, it's touching, literally, physically, physiologically touching the endometrium, fooling the endometrium into believing that it's pregnant. So that's what the copper T is doing. It is telling the endometrium, hey, look, you have a little implanting here. So stop ovulating, and because you have this implantation already going on, which is false, of course, it's a false information, okay? It's a false positive. In addition, today with the copper Ts, they also have, I understand, estrogen on their tips with a slow release. So it's a double whammy, it's a double effect to try to suppress that ovulation by no matter what. But it is, the IUD is fooling the uterus into believing that it's pregnant. So if the breakthrough ovulation happens, the same scenario, here comes the embryo, inhospitable environment, inhospitable endometrium, abortion. To the point that some babies have actually managed to implant and have come out with the IUD implanted in their heads, okay, or some other part of the body, because they actually made it through. Yeah. Okay, they have been born with the copper T somewhere in their body because they said, nature is going to prevail here. Yeah, and so it is obviously an abortifacient, okay? In addition to the contraceptive effect that it may have. Morning after pill, essentially the same argument because it's plan B, levonorgestrel, is typically 1 or 2 dosage. It's a mega dosage of estrogen. It's what it's trying to do in 1 or 2 pills, first pill given now and the second pill taken maybe 6, 8, or 10 hours later. Yes, no. This is actually plan B is levonorgestrel.
Remember that phrase? You can try to drive out nature with a pitchfork, nature will always return.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I believe the pill also works to thicken the mucus so that it slows the sperm down.
Yep.
Prevents the sperm from getting through. That's
Right.
like another way.
But that's the contraceptive.
Yes.
That's contraceptive.
Yeah.
But if it's altering the mucus, it may also inhibit the embryo from implanting because the mucus is involved in the process.
The majority of women I spoke to about the pill,
Yep.
the only thing it does is prevent ovulation. They don't know about the other 2 ways.
Exactly. They don't know, but it's there. That's why I'm teaching it. Exactly. They don't know, and of course, no one's going to tell them because nobody wants them to know. Okay? I think that's how you spell it. Oh. That's the brand name. Let me see if I got it right. Give me a minute here. Yeah, levonorgestrel. Okay, different from RU486. Well, functionally about the same. So Plan B, morning after pill, right? It's just a mega dosage of estrogen, and it's trying to do the same thing in 1 day as opposed to 30 days. So it may prevent ovulation, even as the sperm is trying to get to the egg. So this is the assumption that the sperm didn't get there within 10 minutes after copulation, you know, that the sperm is taking a sweet time to reach the egg. Remember, it can be up to 5 days because the sperm by itself can only last 24 hours. But in the reproductive tract of the woman, the sperm can last up to 5 days functionally, because the mucus, precisely the cervical mucus, has a nutrition for the sperm, all right?
But the egg can only survive 72 hours, right?
Well, on average, 24 hours. On average, 24 hours, yeah. After 24 hours, on average, the normal egg is discarded, is over-ripened. Okay, so it can also cause the abortifacient effect by rendering the endometrium inhospitable. So functionally, you see that these three different contraceptives, different types of contraceptives may have the same effect. It's all about rendering the endometrium inhospitable. All right, now let's move forward to the actual procured abortion itself. This is from Keith Moore and Associates, which is a standard embryology textbook in medical schools for decades, all right? I don't know what edition they're up to now, 10th or 12th edition, Keith Moore, Embryology, Human Embryology. Different types of abortion on the word. A threatened abortion is when the woman is actually bleeding and she may have a spontaneous abortion or miscarriage. A spontaneous abortion, when it actually happens, it's about 50% of pregnancies. Habitual abortion is a repeated abortion, typically spontaneous also. So all these are spontaneous, not procured, all right? This is just the medical terminology. Now, induced abortion. Clinicians prefer to use induced instead of what other procured or induced, or elective. Elective for the choice, right?
What is the definition of concept? You mentioned concept.
Yes, the conceptus could be from fertilization on. Any stage of the embryo is a conceptus because the embryo has been conceived already, all right, has been fertilized. So induced abortion, typically they put it at 20 weeks. So this is viability. This is a stretch. I believe that the earliest viability that we have, at least in town, is about 23 weeks at Baptist Maine Hospital. She was about that big. It's a girl. Happened several years ago at 23 weeks of age. They were to save her. They put it in the NICU, the intensive care neonatal ICU, and she was saved at 23 weeks, okay? But that's pushing viability. It's a technological question. At some point, there may be the artificial womb all away from the zygote, okay? It's a technological question. When is viability? Of course, these preemies, they're going to have all kinds of issues and difficulties and challenges along the way. But the point is that we can now save some unborn from the 23rd week of pregnancy forward.
Similar to the excuse of slavery at some point that people were saying, well, is that we're not ready to make them free citizens.
Yes, it's going to destroy our economy.
Doing them a favor to keep them as slaves because they cannot do it by themselves.
Right.
So it's like if we say, well, that's a justification for slavery. Society wasn't ready to absorb them as fully right citizens.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we go to the same.
It is. It's a parallel argument. For one reason or another, they were not seen as fully human or deserving of human rights. Okay, so they were enslaved, they were sold and bought and tortured and so forth. at some point, it actually took in this country a civil war to gain their freedom. Okay, and today it is revolting to talk about Black folks as somehow not human or not fully human. The hope is that someday we'll have the same mentality with the unborn. That's the hope. In the meantime, we're up to 60 million at least, because again, the abortion industry, they don't really have to report anything, all right? They just have to be kept clean. And so it is according to the highest standards of clinical practice today, and they're safe that way, of course, safe for the mother. And that has also been one of the arguments when we had the alley abortions, the legal abortions. Many women died from bleeding to death and so forth. However, back then, we were not in the millions of abortions. Maybe there were 1,000 abortions in a whole year. Today, it's about 1 million abortions per year, okay, since then. So, moving forward with the terminology here, a complete abortion is when all the products of conception have been evacuated from the uterus. Very important, because an incomplete abortion, also known as a botched abortion, is very dangerous. Those remains will cause an infection on the mother and can kill her from sepsis or septic shock. And therefore, very important to remove all the products of the abortion. This also presents a challenge for a botched abortion, which the woman was sent home or rushed in an ambulance to the hospital from the abortion clinic, and now who finishes the job? Okay, it could very well be a pro-life gynecologist that has to finish the job, because now the fetus sadly has already been killed by somebody else. But those remains, because now we have a cadaver, have to be extracted. And someone has to do that clinically correct, because now the life of the mother is in danger. Okay? So botched abortions are very challenging for pro-life OBGYNs. But they are the best ones to finish the dirty job, sadly. They have to be very clear in their conscience that they did not do the killing. And now they're trying to save the life of a patient. Mm-hmm. Clinically challenging, right? Okay. Missed abortion is the fetus died internally, or the embryo, but was never expelled or discarded. Some of these are called papilliform. I've ever heard of that term, papilliform fetus, when one fetus dies and is left inside the womb and does nothing to the mom, thank God, but then there's another pregnancy, and the subsequent pregnancy grows, the subsequent fetus grows and pushes that remains of the fetus against the walls. And finally, when one is born, the other one comes out also, and it's called papilliform because the dead fetus is like thin, like two-dimensional. It looks like a piece of paper, all right? But the design of the fetus was pushed up against the walls. Those are rare events, but those would be an example of a missed abortion. Miscarriage, we know it's just later, it's a spontaneous abortion, but later at the fetal stage instead of the embryonic stage, all right? Moving forward, quickly here. These are the different methods of abortion. Generally, we have 3 methods. They're either medical, surgical, or combination. Medical is chemical abortion. Surgical is mechanical abortion. And a combination, most likely, most of them are a combination of both. More or less, it lines up by trimester. In the first trimester, a chemical abortion may be done, known as a medical abortion, meaning that with chemicals, the fetus can be killed and extracted. I'm sorry, the chemical abortion from the second trimester forward. Mechanical, in the first trimester by vacuums, because the embryo is small enough to be segmented into parts, like a DNC, dilation and curettage, okay? They use these acronyms precisely not to describe very graphically the procedure, because as one describes the procedure objectively, one starts feeling, queasy and nauseous. Dilation and curettage is the the cervix is dilated, and a curette is inserted. A curette is a medical device. It's like a scalpel, extremely sharp, but rounded. Okay, so here are some curettes. See, and they're extremely sharp. And what they do is just they section the little embryo inside into pieces, and then it's extracted by a vacuum cleaner, by a vacuum tube. Sorry? Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely. You can buy all this. Yes, yes. Oh yes. Because they're used for other things too. For example, cysts and clearing a uterus, endometriosis, and so forth. So you know the tool itself is a clinical tool. It's how it's used on whom. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So challenging. I mean, the tool itself is not intrinsically evil. It's the procedure. So vacuum, either manual or electric vacuum. In the second trimester, the fetus now, because it's beyond the 8 weeks, right? The fetus is a little too large, and the bone structure, the skeleton is a little too calcified to be taken out intact, okay, or cut. So they have to do an intact evacuation. That's D&E. It's a dilation and intact evacuation. Of course, they have to make sure that that little fetus is dead before he or she comes out. Because the fetus comes out alive, that same doctor has to do everything in her power, on his power, to save the life of that fetus. Because now that fetus all of a sudden became a legal person. The minute the head is alive, it comes out of the body, that fetus, I don't care what stage, becomes a legal person. And the medical professional has the duty by law to save the life of that fetus whom he was trying to kill a minute ago. So that's the challenge with these live births. So what do? They make sure that that fetus doesn't come out alive. So before extracting, they take a large bore syringe to the heart, and they just pump an overdose of potassium chloride. They stimulate a heart attack on the fetus. So make sure that they don't come alive. They don't come out alive, okay? That's the procedure. So you have the DNC, DNE, DNX, all of these acronyms so as not to say what's actually happening. You know, the evacuation, the products of the womb, or the products of conception, and so forth, all that language. Mm-hmm. Try to sanitize it as much as possible. The extreme is a partial birth abortion, which is a type of DNX, but just before birth. And because the fetus is now fully developed, I mean, 1 minute before birth and 1 minute after birth, we have essentially the same human, the size and everything else, but the head is not out. To perform a partial birth abortion, that fetus has been turned around in the womb to a breech position, all right, breech, so that the feet first pulled out, literally, but the head is left inside. The surgeon goes in with a tube and goes in through the foramen of the skull, foramen magnum, and literally sucks out the brain. Evidently, that fetus dies, and now the abortion is completed. That's partial birth abortion. Finally, this was so revolting that finally Congress banned it. And it's been challenged in court, so to this day, it's not being applied. The ban is not being applied. So to this day, in some states of the US, it's still partial birth abortion is still legal because judges put a restriction on the ban. Right? Because the head is not out. I know.
That baby is so close to being
Right.
born, then let it be born for adoption. There's no.
Well, that's what the argument that we make for everyone, right?
Yeah.
But it's true, but it's there. Anyway, so just to be clear, in the United States today, in some states, it is legal to have an abortion up until the 9th month, up until the head literally comes out of the body. It's not a legal person, and that's the whole point. Mm-hmm.
There's an argument, I think, by the governor of Virginia about even justifying
if the baby is born.
The baby is
yes.
still alive, but
Right.
he don't want it.
Exactly.
Because he has some malformation or something.
Exactly.
That is okay.
Right.
Just basically kill him.
Yes. And that, he went so far that it backfired, because the legislature said, well, that is actually infanticide because now we have a legal person, and it backfired. New York got away with it somehow, because what happened when the current administration started putting pro-life judges at the Supreme Court, all right, some states, some pro-choice states got very scared and started putting laws into their statutes so that even if abortion, the Supreme, Roe versus Wade was rescinded, they would still have the right, those states will still have a right to do abortions, okay? Which is the way it was really before 1973. Each state decided whether or not to legalize abortion and at what stage of development.
The only way to get rid of it completely, aside from a total conversion of parts, is a personhood amendment. That's the only way.
Yes, it's a personhood amendment, correct, which involves a constitutional Congress, you know, which is highly unlikely. It opens the Constitution for all kinds of changes and so forth. We can get there on the legal side, but anyway, when this current administration started putting pro-life judges at the Supreme Court, with enough judges now that possibly a reversal of Roe versus Wade, these pro-abortion states got very scared and tried to secure state laws to protect abortion, which what I want to say about that is that it's the way it was before 1973. That's the way it was, really. It was up to each state to determine the legality of abortion. I'm sorry, I'm a little over time, but I would really like to finish this, if you don't mind. If you do have to leave, go ahead, but I'm going to finish it, all right? Just a few more minutes. We need now to go into, look at the legalization of abortion in the United States. Supreme Court, Roe versus Wade, 1973, January 22nd. Roe, we now know, these are two fictitious names, right? Roe was Norma McCorvey, and Wade was the state of Texas. In the state of Texas, back then, abortion was illegal. In the state of New York, back then, abortion was legal up until a certain stage, okay? So Norma happened to be in Texas. She was young, she was single, she was pregnant. It was not her first, I think she had had children before, yeah. She was stating facts. She was ignorant. She was not well educated. There's a very derogative expression that people use sometimes. You may have heard this phrase before, white trash. People talk about white trash, sad, derogative way of referring to someone like that. Basically someone who was ignorant, poor, but she was exploited by a small group of feminists who wanted to legalize abortion and said, this is the perfect person that we can use to push the issue all the way through to the Supreme Court. There's a small group of feminists, radical feminists, who selected her specifically to put her in front of the Court of Texas and move it up to exhaust all the appeals until they went to the Supreme Court. So they had already strategized about this. It has come out over the years by looking at the records. Okay, so Norma gets eventually the Supreme Court back then to go on 5 in favor, 4 against. The break was Justice Blackmun to legalize abortion. And she ended up not having the abortion. She ended up having the baby and keeping the baby, number one. She became a radical feminist and for many years worked in abortion clinics and was involved in the pro-choice movement, moving it forward galore in the United States. Of course, the United States, we have to realize, has a responsibility to the rest of the world, because the rest of the world thinks that we are the super duper of everything. And whatever we do, right or wrong, especially the wrong, they copy. So we have rock music, they copy it. We have blue jeans, they copy it. We have abortion, they copy it. And so whatever becomes legal here represents democracy, represents the best, represents liberation, represents enlightenment, represents the best for many other nations of the world. So abortion, yes, thank you, progress. So abortion was legalized like wildfire through many other countries of the world, especially the Europe, the enlightened countries, okay? The more advanced technologically and so forth, they saw that this was really finally liberating women, okay? And it gave them the power and the authority over their own bodies, the absolute autonomy that they were requesting, all right? Because after all, only women can get pregnant, and that other creature is inside of me, and I just don't want that thing inside of me, okay? So for many years, Norma was at the forefront of this whole movement, expanding, consolidating Planned Parenthood, which did not start with Norma, started with Norma McCorvey decades ago, again, an Irish Catholic who eventually became a radical feminist and became a eugenicist. There's a little phrase from Norma, from who started, it was a Women's League, Abortion Rights, which eventually became Planned Parenthood. Who was, sorry? No, Gloria. The nurse, the Irish nurse in New York that started Planned Parenthood, who invented the pill. Oh, I'll cover her when we get to contraception, the history of Margaret Sanger. Thank you very much. Margaret Sanger. We don't want word to get out when she was searching for funds with the Gamble brothers from Procter & Gamble to develop the pill. We don't want word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. You can punch those words into Google and her letter will come up. We don't want word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. To this day, most of the Planned Parenthood clinics are in minority neighborhoods, in Black neighborhoods. She was a eugenicist, spillover from the 1930s Hitler era. Okay, back to Norma. Eventually, this is what happened to Norma. One day, I was sitting in an OR office, operation room's office, when I noticed a fetal development poster. The progression was so obvious. The eyes were so sweet. Remember, now she's had several children, so she knows about motherhood. It hurt my heart just looking at them. I ran outside and finally it dawned on me. Norma, I said to myself, they're right. I had worked with pregnant women for years. I had been through 3 pregnancies and deliveries myself. I should have known. Yet something in that poster made me lose my breath. I kept seeing the picture of that tiny 10-week-old embryo. And I said to myself, that's a baby. It's as if blinders just fell off my eyes and I suddenly understood the truth. That's a baby. I felt crushed under the truth of this realization. This is Norma McCorvey, okay? The one who got abortion legalized in this country. I had to face up to the awful reality. Abortion wasn't about products of conception. It wasn't about missed periods. It was about children being killed in their mother's wombs. All those years, I was wrong. Signing that affidavit, I was wrong. Working in an abortion clinic, I was wrong. No more of this first trimester, second trimester, third trimester stuff. Abortion, at any point, was wrong. It was so clear, painfully clear. These are her words. Talk about conversion. Talk about St. Paul. Okay, so she becomes pro-life. And she spends the rest of her life trying to convince people how wrong she was and that we need to change. We need to reverse Roe versus Wade. Not only does she convert pro-life, she converts to Catholicism also. So imagine who heard her confession. Okay, not I. No. But yes, and this is why I have hope. If Norma can convert, anybody can convert. Okay? Then there was Bernard Nathanson. I don't know if you heard about Bernard Nathanson. Some of us are old enough to remember Bernard Nathanson. He was the #1 abortionist in the United States, Jewish fellow who had clinics all over the US. He said himself, when I got to 2,000 abortions myself, I stopped counting. And he had clinics, dozens of clinics throughout the US. The largest abortionist at that time in the US. He converted to pro-life, and then he converted to Catholicism. And he spent the rest of his life talking about pro-life and trying to convince people how wrong he was. Abby Johnson was recently not Catholic, Christian, but she was working. She was the youngest CEO or manager of an abortion clinic, I think precisely in Texas. And as her conversion, the movie Unplanned, the book Unplanned, highly recommended. All right.
Have you seen the movie Mary Full of Grace? It's a Colombian movie.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's a Colombian that travels to the U.S.
Yes.
As a mule.
Oh.
And one of the reasons why she was able to go through customs is because she was diagnosed pregnant.
Uh-huh.
She didn't know that she was pregnant.
She didn't know.
And she had all these
cocaine
inside. So watch the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Maria llena de gracia.
Mary full of grace.
Uh-huh. We have most of the action in part in Colombia and then in Jersey.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Move,
wow. Mary full of grace. Okay.
That conversion.
Yes. Right. Because these are existential, struggles. These are existential struggles. And that's why I say for us men, let's face it, we will never be pregnant. Okay. And so we have to be very, very respectful of the pregnant mom who's going through this struggle. So to me, we have to support that woman 100%, whatever she needs was for her not to kill her baby, because I'm tired of hearing confessions of abortion. It's been 4 decades almost. And they're destroyed, they're totally destroyed. Whatever, it could be 5, 10, 20, 40 years after the abortion. And they're destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, with the thing about the normal abortion case, you said she didn't realize that it was a baby. In my high school, back in with Archbishop McCarthy,
Mm-hmm.
One time they showed us a video of abortions and how it was done.
Right.
To all the classes.
Wow.
And I think nobody that saw that would ever get an abortion done because they saw how it was done.
The real thing.
Tools they used.
No one had lunch that day.
Chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
We had people that fainted. And
yeah.
I know
exactly.
that no girl
exactly.
in that school probably would ever have an abortion.
Yeah. Very serious second thoughts when they see the reality, but they say it's gruesome. Okay, when pro-lifers show the body parts, they say it's gruesome and it's unethical, but it's a reality. It's a graphic reality. Seeing is believing. Anyway, I always like to end it on a healthy part or a positive spin. All right. So at the end of the day, there are really two options, two alternatives. Two alternatives to the abortion is to either keep the baby and support that woman in whatever she needs to keep that baby, or to give the baby up for adoption. I understand that keeping that having given the baby up for adoption is an extremely courageous and self-sacrifice, because she's already bonded with that baby. She's bonded ever since she heard the little kick, la patadita, and she's bonded with that pregnancy, So most likely, if she's going to give birth, she's going to try to keep the baby. But she could be very courageous, and if she really is such a distraught for her lifestyle that she cannot really handle that child, just give him up. There are thousands of sterile couples, infertile couples in the US that have to go to Russia, to China, to Latin America, to all parts of the world to adopt babies because there are no babies to be adopted. There are no babies to be adopted. And so it is a very courageous thing when a young woman decides to give, or older, I don't care, if she decides in all honesty that she cannot support that child, just give him up for adoption.
I completely agree. Mm-hmm. I will not have my 3 nieces and nephews. That will not happen.
Really? There you go. You see?
2 adopted here and 1 we went to Russia together.
Wow. Look at that. I'm not making it up. These are real life scenarios.
It's life-changing. And my 2 younger sisters were ES daughters.
Yes.
So they had 2 miscarriages between them.
Wow.
And were never able to get pregnant. this was the answer to their prayers.
Exactly. So many willing couples are so generous and they give their life for having these children. So we know that on average, those children will be very well kept for. Of course, in the past, we know gruesome stories about orphanages and all that and abuse, but on average today, it's not the case. These adopted children, they have it made because they are the angels of that couple.
My younger aunt, she was adopted. She was
Yes.
like 4.
Yeah, you see?
And my grandparents, her, even though
You see?
she's like 3 years older than I am.
Right.
We were raised
Another
together.
generation in between, yeah.
Just imagine your life without that home.
Yes,
And there's no extinction.
right, exactly. She's part of the family. Period. And so that's why I always give out the little sheet. Okay, there's a lot of support, clinical. A pregnant woman today gets all the state coverage on clinicals, on medical. And even if she already has children and is pregnant, she gets coverage, and all her children, the born and unborn children, get covered also by the state. We pay for it already. All right, so there's
And I'd rather
medical.
pay for that than abortion.
I'm sorry?
I'd rather pay for that than the abortion.
Yes, of course. Exactly. That's the whole point. And so there's medical help, there's financial help, there's emotional help, there's spiritual help, there's all kinds of help from the right people. Okay? That's a little sheet that I gave you. So if ever you hear of anyone, pass it on. And we also take care of moms who have gone through abortion and finally have realized what has happened. They are in great need of healing, big time of healing. And that's called Project Rachel, okay? Who mourns for her children. So we take care of them. We help them. There's a whole program that allows them to process and come to reconciliation and receive God's forgiveness. And the most important thing is not for God to forgive them, is for them to forgive themselves once they have realized what has happened. Equivalent project for men, for the boyfriends or husbands, who sometimes don't even want the abortion, but she will have it. Even if he doesn't want it, we have no saying in it, is Project Joseph. We started here in Miami, in the Archdiocese of Miami, by a group of Franciscans, and is to work with the husband or the boyfriend, or either hanging around the abortion clinic waiting for the procedure to happen, or before or after, but they're involved in some kind of a pregnancy to help them own up to fatherhood. All right, Project Joseph. So resources are there for sure, and we can tap into them. That's it. You've been very kind and patient with me to bear to the end, but here we are. So this is the first controversial topic. We'll go into other controversial topics in the following weeks.
What's the status regarding abortion and what they're saying, age, consent, stuff like that?
Correct. Minor, okay, and this is the loophole. And Siobhan was mentioning this, that there are provisions in the law for some protection to the unborn, and it is true, depending on the trimester, the third trimester from the second trimester on, they need some kind, so it's the reason, the motive, first of all, has to be for her life or her health. The loophole is here. Life, we understand organically that the pregnancy may kill her. Health includes mental health, and that's the loophole. Mental health means that this pregnancy is causing me distress, and she may feel actual distress, or she may be faking the distress, but that's sufficient for the doctor to certify to write off on the abortion. And then with that certification, she goes to the judge to get the permission to have the abortion. Okay, so the mental health issue is the one that is the big loophole. That's where the truck fits through. All right. Then on minors, in principle, it's been debated back and forth, and some states have managed to put the provision of the parental consent because they're minors. They need parental consent for the ear piercing, they need parental consent for dental work and so forth, minors. But in abortion, because it is legal up until the 9 months, at the end of the day, if a teenager wants it, she can get it, and she can get it legal. She doesn't have to tell her parents. And the medical professionals who hear about it are bound by HIPAA to not tell their parents under law, under penalty of losing their license. So she can get it.
What about the informed consent? Let's say we're going to have an abortion, and
Yes.
do they get one? Or?
Sign here. It's up to Planned Parenthood to tell her about the embryology of the fetus. They're making money on that procedure. So it's the fox taking care of the hen house, like we say, right? In other words, it's up to the clinic to inform the girl about the embryonic development. Products of conception, terminating the pregnancy, all the euphemism is not fully human. Well, the soul, some people believe in the soul, some people don't believe in the soul. Some religions don't believe that you're human until you have your first breath. So they get all that.
Is that informed consent? That's what they do.
Well, that's what they put as informed. That's the information that is given to the girl. And so the girl goes, oh, okay, so, well, it's legal anyway. See, that's the point, is that the legality of it is the big thing, because law educates. If it is so bad, if it is really the killing of an innocent human being, how can it be legal? How can the Supreme Court, that has access to the Library of Congress, is the largest library in the world? Nothing that has been written or talked about or known is not in the Library of Congress. Congress has access to all of the knowledge of the world. And the Supreme Court has access to the Library of Congress. How can they not know? Because of ideology, because they were bamboozled, because this is Chauvin's opinion, yes, but they were intimidated by a small group of radical feminists who saw legalization of abortion as the flag of liberation. This is the ultimate liberation from men, from women, and from everybody. This is truly, in their conception, autonomy. I have a right to my body, period, full stop. No matter who or what is in my body, this is my body. End of story. End of story.
But everything that has come
As a consequence.
Assisted suicide, starving Terry Shiloh, this all goes back to abortion.
It really does.
The door and
Yes.
split it in.
Yes. Now, I'll scandalize you even more. Abortion, in my opinion, and looking at it historically, is a product of contraception. Because when the first lie was contraception. And when contraception didn't work, don't worry about it, we'll kill the product. So don't worry, it didn't work, don't worry, we'll take care of it. So when contraception didn't work, they needed to go the extra step, abortion. And so this is where we're at. Very challenging. I know this is inflammatory for a number of people. This is my view over decades of being immersed in it. And it's what I present. Again, I'm still longing for that reasonable dialogue with any pro-choicer. Maybe someday it will happen. In the meantime, these are the witnesses. These are the testimonies that we have. And why do 500,000, close to 1 million people march every year after year in the most gruesome? I was in Washington several times for the March for Life. There was a blizzard one time. The postcard was just white of the blizzard in '79 in Washington, D.C. It was just a white postcard. That was the blizzard, you know. It was ice and snow. You have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people come every single January 22nd for the March for Life in what is moving these people? Are they all insane? Are they all obsessed? Are they all fanatics? How can it be? Generation after generation, 47 years later. You know?
Yeah. So a lot of young people going to.
Yes, yes. I'm glad because they're the ones can endure that bitter cold and the weather. And they come from Nebraska. They come from all over the state. Sometimes they spend 2-3 days on the bus to get there. Yes, you see, yeah. So it's a testimony, you know, we can say, why did these radicals were following, why did these people follow Jesus Christ? Such a radical guy, you know, didn't have a place to stay. And he was talking about forgiveness and repentance and love. Well, it's become a tremendous religion nowadays, right?
So when you read the gospel, I got this audiobook version. Well, it's actually 8.5, and I purchased the New Testament audio.
Audio, yes.
So I have never heard the Gospels and visuals and everything else in one shot.
Straight through.
Like you go and you read Mark from the beginning to the end.
Right.
You read Matthew, John,
right.
and Luke. I have never done that in one sequence.
Right.
Most of the time, you read the Bible or you read the portion.
Section.
And over time, it's hard to put everything together, like one story.
Yes.
Like one part.
One narrative,
like
yes.
Reading a book from the beginning to the end. I have never read. I mean,
it's very difficult.
Never in one shot.
Yeah. Very
but
difficult.
when you read it
or hear it
in one shot, it's amazing. It's overwhelming.
Yes.
It's impossible. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. It's unique.
It's like you are having access to something so unique, so spectacular of the life of a human being and the circumstances.
Yes.
That you have to make a leap of faith and make that decision. It's that astonishment that all of a sudden it's like the key to your soul. And
the blinders come off.
Right. And you fall in love and you have to believe. It's like you are given with a certain amount of faith. You say it's a gift to all of us. But I think that there are certain scenarios and situations that just open to a deeper,
we need to develop the faith.
And that is what happened to me.
Me too.
I cannot, it's like watching an abortion, one of these procedures, and not remembering.
Right, and not being moved by it.
It's a mark that one.
Right. Yeah, it's a moment of conversion.
Stay there forever.
And that's reading it or hearing it. Now imagine living it, having lived at the time of Jesus, with Jesus. Okay, and so that's what's moving us, right? And that's what we call Christianity. So, all right, thank you very much once again. We'll continue. Now I have to look because at one point I'm going to be absent. We still have a meeting next February. Yes, we have session 4. This is the third session, so 4 and 5, and then the 6th session I'll be away. But we still have at least 2 more sequential following Saturdays. Okay, so God willing, next Saturday we'll get into another hot one, which will be contraception, and we'll go from there. Thanks again, and see you next Saturday.
I have a question about dates. When does the summer, do you know when the summer course starts? Do you know the date of that?
Yes, actually, I can tell you, I might as well record it too. Let's see, I think it's, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's in May. No, yes, May 2nd is, so May 9.
Okay, that's the problem.
Correct.
Goes for 14 Saturdays, basically?
No, only 8 because that's a short summer.
But 2 classes in 8 weeks?
No, because then we switch because in the summer you have environmental bioethics with me and you have biostatistics with another professor. And that typically is on a week evening, 1 week evening, which we need to decide what is the most convenient for everyone. A week evening, yes, and that would be 2 separate courses. For those who cannot make it in the evening, you'd have to watch the videos and so forth. There's a way of doing that. We'll do it as a swarm. We'll do that course together, okay?
Okay, so yours will start on May 9th and go for 8 Saturdays.
We'll go for 8 Saturdays. Only that May 9th is also the ordination of priests in the archdiocese, so I may be away from the ordination.
Okay.
But basically, that second Saturday of May.
Okay, and then it'll be 8 Saturdays, right?
8 Saturdays,
Okay.
yes.
And so then the statistics class will start?
That same week, and we'll go through for 8 weeks with them also. And then you'll have about an 8-week break until the fall.
Okay,
So you do have a...
Are in the same 8 weeks, it's just one's in the evening?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
I got
it's the
it.
same 8 weeks, okay?
Now, the last question is about internship. Are we gonna actually be on Saturdays during the internship class?
No, the internship is going on right now at your own place, and no, we may talk about the internship at some point if you want to share some stories and whatnot, but we should do that even after the summer, so that people have enough time to do some internships. Okay, so
For
in the
those
fall.
8 weeks, we won't actually be coming here on Saturdays.
Correct. Well, no. So you talk about this, the second fall,
Right.
right? The second fall, you have healthcare bioethics.
Right. Oh,
Okay.
and that runs for.
But we can also do healthcare bioethics. At that point, we can do it online because I have videos for that. That is team taught by a number of clinicians, by a number of medical doctors. All right. So really, the only one that we should do in person is the one on organ transplants, which I teach that. But the other sessions on that healthcare bioethics in the fall are done by medical doctors who have done it in previous cohorts, and I have the videos of that. So basically, it's you watching the video and giving me a summary of it. All right. So for that second fall, we would only need to meet in person, face to face, once for the transplant bioethics, organ transplants, and the others are online basically. And the internship, of course, you'll be doing all along. So don't wait until fall for the internship. Make sense?
Thank you, Father.
Okay. Thank you, Maggie.
Bye, guys.
Yes, so I'm gonna stop here, and that will be on the recording for others.